Call to order this meeting of the James City Service Authority Board of Directors regular meeting. Good evening, Ms. Powell.
Good evening.
Would you please call the roll?
Mr. Hippel.
Here.
Ms. Larson.
Here.
Mr. McGlennon. Here. Mr. Eisenhower.
Here.
Ms. Sadler.
Here. Next, we have presentations. A resolution of appreciation for Mr. James Hopkins. Mr. Powell.
Thank you, Chair Sadler. I am hoping to start a new tradition, following on Mr. Stevens' lead, actually, and recognizing retirees in front of the Board of Directors. And so our first one is Mr. James Hopkins. Mr. Hopkins has been with the Service Authority for over 21 years. Ms. Sadler is going to read a resolution in a moment, but as the resolution says, Jim has been instrumental in leading the Service Authority through some significant technological advances over the years. And I'm also happy that his wife, Marie, who I think most of you know, is also a county employee, and she's here today as well. So with that, Ms. Sadler, if you'd read the resolution. And Mr. Hopkins, come on up.
I think Mrs. Hopkins
Yes.
It's always a joint effort, right? Come on up. Being here. So this is a resolution of appreciation for Mr. James Hopkins, whereas Mr. James Hopkins has been employed by the James City Service Authority since February 1998 and since October 2008 as a Supervisory Control and Data Acquisition Utility System Analyst. Whereas Mr. Hopkins is retiring effective August 1st, 2019, and whereas the JCSA has made significant progress in its use of technology, and Mr. Hopkins has played a central role in this progress, and whereas Mr. Hopkins oversaw the implementation of JCSA's first, how do you say it? SCADA system, improving the organization's ability to communicate with and manage its facilities. And whereas Mr. Hopkins oversaw the implementation of Hanson JCSA's work order management system, and whereas Mr. Hopkins has essentially been on call 24 hours per day during his 21 years of service to the JCSA, that's why you're here too. Whereas Mr. Hopkins embodies the JCSA's values of safety, customer service, and teamwork. Now, therefore, be it resolved that the Board of Directors does hereby recognize Mr. James Hopkins and presents this resolution as a token of appreciation for his dedicated service to the James City Service Authority. Be it therefore resolved that the Board of Directors offers its best wishes to Mr. Hopkins in his retirement. Congratulations. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Would you like to say anything? No, he's good. Well, thank you. Thank you. We appreciate your hard work. Thank you again, Mr. Hopkins. Next on our agenda, we have public comment. Any speakers?
I do not have any speaker cards.
All right, thank you. Next is the consent calendar. We have number 1, minutes adoption. Number 2, formal acceptance of water and sewer systems, fiscal year 2019. Number 3, appointment of assistant treasurer to the Board of Directors of the James City Service Authority. And number 4, the resolution of appreciation.
Motion for approval?
Everybody good with that? All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? All right. Public hearings. Number 1, easement conveyance, Kingsway, Queens Path. Mr. Powell.
Thank you, Madam Chair. As part of the promenade development at Route 5 and 199, the James City Service Authority currently holds some easements along those two roads. For those roads to be accepted into the VDOT system, we have to basically abandon the easements, and part of the process to do that is to convey them to the county. But the James City Service Authority obviously still retain the right to have our infrastructure there and maintain the ability to access them and maintain them. I recommend approval of the resolution.
Any questions for staff before we open the public hearing? No? So we will open the public hearing. Do we have any speakers this evening, Mr. Powell?
No, ma'am.
We will close that public hearing. Look for a discussion, motion.
I'll make that motion.
Mr. Powell, would you please call the roll?
Mr. Hippel.
Aye.
Ms. Larson.
Aye.
Mr. McGlinnan. Mr. Eisenhower.
Aye.
Ms. Sadler.
Aye. Next is board considerations. Anyone? Board requests and directives. Sailing right through. General manager's update.
Just a reminder that our annual Safety Awards and Employee of the Year luncheon is tomorrow at 11:30, and if you can make it, that'd be great.
Any other updates about water restrictions for the summer? I mean, I'm just saying, a few neighbors of mine have been watering on Mondays, and it kind of bugs me a little bit, but
We probably don't have to worry about them today.
not today, no.
Nothing new, I guess. I did participate in a podcast last week that was, I think, made public in the last few days. So I guess as a reminder, no irrigation on Mondays. If you live in an odd number house or a house with an odd number address, you can irrigate on Wednesday, Friday, and Sunday, and even is Tuesday, Thursday, Saturday, but no watering between the hours of 9 and 5.
Or you can do like me and just reseed again in the fall. Call it a day. All right. Well, with that, I will look for a motion for adjournment until 5 p.m., August 13, 2019, for a regular meeting.
Motion?
Mr. Powell?
Mr. Hippel?
Aye.
Ms. Larson?
Aye.
Mr. McGlinnan? Mr. Eisenhower? Ms. Sadler?
Aye. We are adjourned.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you again.
Okay, we're ready? Roll. Is that the rock? There we go, that's better. Call this meeting of the James City County Board of Supervisors to order for purposes of work session. Mr. Stevens, please call the roll.
Mr. Hippel,
Here.
Ms. Larson,
Here.
Ms. Sadler,
Here.
Mr. McGlinnan,
Here.
Mr. Eisenhower,
Here.
all present.
Okay. We have, before we start our work session, we have a proclamation, and I'm going to go down to the podium to do this. And if Jason would join me, thank you. Make sure I've got everything.
Yeah, while Mr. Eisenhower is making his way down to the podium, it's my pleasure to be in front of the board today to do some brief introductions. Mr. Eisenhower was good enough in June to help work on a proclamation to recognize and celebrate the district of Jamestown, Accra, and Jamestown Island here in James City County. And one of the scholars of Ghana, Mr. Kojo Yanka, has finished a book and completed a book. It's entitled From Jamestown to Jamestown. So we're honoring him with this proclamation, and I'd like to bring a couple people up, just so if they can join me up here. Mr. Kojo Yanka, the representative from the Jamestown district in Ghana, Arafwa Aning. And then also joining us today from the Jamestown Yorktown Foundation is Mr. Luke Pecoraro.
Come right on up here. We'll do this. Okay, thank you. It was my pleasure to be able to issue this proclamation recognizing the connection between Jamestown, Virginia, and the Jamestown District in Accra, Ghana. And considering all of the commemorative events that are happening at Jamestown over the next week, I thought it was important to formally read this proclamation and present it to the dignitaries here today. So if you'll bear with me. It's a proclamation from Jamestown to Jamestown, honoring our shared histories and united futures. This was done on June 18th, 2019. James City County recognizes and celebrates the connection between the Jamestown District in Accra, Ghana, and the historic Jamestown Island in James City County, Virginia. We acknowledge our shared British colonial pasts and settlements that have had such a profound impact on our communities. Whereas James City County is located where explorers established the first successful English colony in the New World in 1607, and whereas Jamestown, Ghana, as it became to be known after the erection of James Fort by the British in 1673, and whereas 2019 marks the 400th anniversary of the arrival of the first Africans brought to Virginia, and Jamestown, Ghana was one of the many locations in West Africa where the slave trade originated. And whereas both Jamestown sites have since recognized and learned from the atrocities of the past, and whereas both Jamestown sites have now grown to become thriving, vibrant communities that rely heavily on the culture and connectivity grown from those histories, and whereas the tourism industry and sense of place for both Jamestown locations is a benefit to the larger cities of Accra and James City County respectively, and whereas Mr. Kojo Yanka is a founder and former president of the African University College of Communications based in Accra, Ghana, he is also a scholar, journalist, author, and former member of Parliament and Minister of State in the Republic of Ghana. And whereas the Honorable Mr. Yanka is currently working on his next book, From Jamestown to Jamestown, highlighting our shared histories. Now therefore be it resolved that I, Chairman of the Board of Supervisors of James City County, Virginia, hereby proclaim the 18th day of June to be, and hereby proclaimed as, From Jamestown to Jamestown Day in the county of James City, and call upon all citizens to join in observance of this occasion and extend the hand of friendship and hospitality. In witness whereof I have hereunto set my hand and caused the seal of the county of James City, Virginia, to be affixed this 18th day of June, 2019. So we have that presentation for you. We also have a few other little items. This is our county logo, a nice good sized one. Mm-hmm. And to go with that, we have the county flag.
Oh.
And I understand that since there are two of you here, we have these nice little booklets you can use for note taking from Jamestown. And we want to thank you very much for being here, and I hope you have enjoy your stay. And you're going to stay a little while with us this time, or are you going to be off again?
Be off again. I have got to go back to Ghana.
Back to Ghana. Okay. Well, thank you so much. And if you would like to say, yes, please.
Yes, thank you all very much. Thank you. 25 years ago, I attended a function here in Jamestown. It was the 375th anniversary of the arrival of the first 20 plus Africans in this part of the world. And I thought that it was opportune for me to look at the link between Jamestown here and Jamestown in Accra, Ghana. So when I went back, something struck me. And that was the first time I was realizing that Jamestown itself had a fort, which was also a trading post, a slave trading post. So I used Jamestown to represent all the coastal towns in the southwest of Africa, where slaves were captured from and taken through to the New World as my reference point. And I did a lot of research, and since 1994, I've read dozens of books, and I've been able to put this together in a readable fashion, a story that I term Letters to an African Child, to tell the history of our peoples since that time. I must say that out here, with all my travels in this part of the world, even those who have African descent do not know where they come from. Similarly, those on the continent have no idea what happened to those that went out, as captives to the New World. So I tried to put all these pieces together in a very simple story. And this is what I've done. I know that there's a lot more to be done, but at least I've been able to complete this at a time when Ghana and the rest of Africa is celebrating the Year of Return, 400 years of Africans going into captivity and slavery and all that. It's a painful story, but it has to be told. And our children will also have to know that these things happened so that we do not distort history along the line. Mr. Eisenhower, I'm happy to announce that the book is out. Good. And it's my pleasure to present to you first copies of the book, Jamestown to Jamestown, Letters to an African Child. It's photographed for you.
Oh, thank you.
Commemoration of Jamestown, Virginia, My pleasure.
Thank you.
And I know Jason Perez has been working with me for the last number of years, and I thought he should receive the second copy. Jason, if you don't mind. Jason, thank you for all the collaboration. Thank you. There will be copies out there that a colleague of mine brought out. So those of you who are interested in owning copies, I'm sure they'll be out there when we get out.
Thank you very much.
So thank you.
We will recess the meeting at this point since we're going to move into the work session, but that'll give us an opportunity to take some photos here while they're getting the cameras reset for our work session.
Sure.
Okay?
Sure.
So, you all like to come down and get in the photo?
Yes. Jamestown.
Rosa.
Jamestown girls and boys.
Everybody come.
Jamestown girls and boys. Yes, these are Jamestown people living in Virginia, right?
Oh, how cool.
Right now, I'm definitely going to need everybody to move back just a little bit.
Okay.
Keep going. Keep all the way back.
Okay.
We gotta get room for the.
Right here.
All right, thanks.
Little ones.
Oops, just,
So,
okay.
Ralph was,
All right.
let's hold.
It's right there. roll since we've already done that.
It's been a couple of weeks since the game on.
We wanted to start by welcoming our Planning Commission members here, and we will turn it over to Mr. Haldeman to get yours called to order and set up. We'll be ready for our joint meeting.
Thanks, Mr. Eisenhower. I'd like to call this July 23rd meeting of the Planning Commission to order. Mr. Holt, would you please call the roll?
Ms. Dowdy.
Here.
Ms. Leverins.
Here.
Mr. Polster.
Here.
Mr. Schmidt. Here. Mr. O'Connor could not be with us today. Mr. Crop.
Here.
And Mr. Haldeman.
Here.
Thank you. We have a quorum.
Back to you.
Okay, thank you. I'm going to turn it over very quickly then. We're going to start the agenda item, first agenda item with Ms. Rosario. We'll introduce the comp plan methodology, scope, and timeline.
Thank you. As noted in your packet, staff has been making steady progress on the initiation of the comprehensive plan update. Using guidance from the work session in February, staff proceeded to finalize the methodology, scope, and timeline for the comprehensive plan update. I'll briefly touch upon the key elements in a minute. We also worked to select a consultant to assist with the update and the development of several strategic plan operational initiatives. Vlad Gavrilovich, principal with EPRPC, will update you on this integrated effort and lead us through a discussion of some key questions. Last, we worked with the University of Virginia Center for Survey Research to conduct the citizen survey per the guidance from the Board of Supervisors. Due to technical difficulties, we will be patching him in a little bit later after Mr. Gavrilovich's presentation. As I mentioned, the comprehensive plan update will contain several key elements. First, we will continue the vision established in past comprehensive plans and the 2035 strategic plan, using the citizen survey to help gauge differences in opinion on significant issues over time. Of course, this will be a starting point. We will have a significant community engagement effort to let us know what differences there may be in citizen opinions in other issues and finer grain points to consider. Secondly, we will be building upon the foundation of past review methodologies for structure using some familiar teams. First, we will rely on the community participation team, comprised of 10 citizens, 4 commissioners, and 6 community leaders, to encourage, facilitate, and report citizen participation as part of a robust overall community engagement effort. This review will feature a greater level of facilitation, expanded opportunities for input, and more interactive experiences. We will also use a Planning Commission working group comprised of the 7 members of the Planning Commission and a citizen member from the CPT to perform the technical review of the comp plan elements and goals, strategies, and actions. Among other items new to this effort will be the ability to use modeling to guide these decisions. We will hold periodic check-ins with the Board of Supervisors throughout the process to inform the board and to receive guidance. A fourth element was establishing a timeline of approximately 2 years, starting with the formation of the community participation team in this summer, and concluding with the consideration of the draft plan, and we're aiming for the summer of 2021. The last element was to establish a scope that met all state code requirements, old and new, to incorporate funded strategic plan operational initiatives and address priority areas identified by the Planning Commission and Board of Supervisors. The strategic plan operational initiatives will be integrated into the comprehensive plan process to facilitate a data-guided process. At this point, I'll turn it over to Vlad to discuss these items with you, the integrated effort, and to lead you through some discussion questions as we launch the comprehensive plan update. Thank you.
Thank you, Tammy. Well, good afternoon, Mr. Chair, members of the Board and Planning Commission. Really honored and pleased to be here to launch this landmark effort and to get your input and guidance as we start. This is the second time I've been assisting the county with a comprehensive plan. I was here 2 cycles ago in 07 to 09, but we've assembled a really great team for this comprehensive plan update. And what I'd like to do is walk you through an introduction to the team, the process, kind of benchmarks in the process, and as Tammy said, close with a couple of questions so you can give us some guidance and direction as we start. So you have the PowerPoint, I believe, in your packet. You've also got some more detail on the scope, the milestone scope document. But I'm just going to walk you through these slides now and kind of have any questions that you want to ask, have hopefully plenty of time to answer your questions. As I said, we'll talk about the purpose and the roles and the team that's assembled for this, and take a minute to talk about this new lens of scenario planning that we have to look through the plan, and then close with some questions. First of all, the team that we've assembled for this, as you'll see, this is not an ordinary comprehensive plan. This is a more sophisticated, data-guided approach, and we have 4 firms that we've assembled. EPR is an expert in scenario planning and comprehensive planning. I myself have over 30 years of experience in comprehensive planning up and down the East Coast and in Virginia. I have a team of seasoned planners with me, but we've also got Clarion Consultants. Leanne King worked with you may recall, in your strategic plan update. We have Tischler Bice. They are fiscal impact experts. Julie Herland's also worked on a strategic plan. And we have Michael Baker International. They're kind of a global leader in transportation planning and infrastructure planning. So we've got a really great team of experts, and the reason we've assembled them is, as I said, this is a different, more sophisticated approach to comprehensive planning, both in terms of what goes into the process and what comes out. So we will be building these kind of computer models for land use, transportation infrastructure, and fiscal impacts that will allow you more information, more kind of data to analyze your policy choices for the future. And out of it, you will also have some leave-behind models to assist your staff in things like planning for proffers, the impacts of development, infrastructure facilities, fire stations, schools, things like that, and especially important going into your capital budget, capital improvement program, and future updates of the strategic plan. So it is a scientific, sophisticated process, but also one that really is built on the cornerstone of the legacy of good planning that the county has done. And I want to highlight that, especially in the reasons for this update. In addition to the state mandate to do plan updates of the plan every 5 years, you'll hear, I think, from your citizen survey responses later in your meeting, all the things that people value in this county for quality of life, and how many of them were contributed to by a legacy of good planning and prior plan updates. And certainly want to continue that legacy, but also look at the forces of change. This is a very pivotal time for a lot of communities, and the county, I'm sure, included, as far as the uncertainty about future changes, be they economic or regional, state, global changes even. And that's what scenario planning will help us address, as kind of our choices in the wake of these changes. But also especially important is this implements recommendations in the county's strategic plan. So the first 3 items here were direct recommendations from your strategic plan, looking at the fiscal impacts of some of these big land use changes that are potential, looking at the cumulative impacts of potential changes to the PSA, and then refining the fiscal model so that we can assess these kind of changes and future impacts and stay on a good fiscal course. So all 3 of these are part of the comprehensive plan update, and that's one of the reasons we've assembled this team and we have this kind of more detailed process for the update. The 4 frameworks, if you will, the benefits of this process. One, on the visioning side, is refining the county's vision for protecting that high quality of life over the next 2.5 decades. Secondly, on the scenario planning, will help the county kind of steward public resources in the face of these future uncertainties and these trends and forces. From a comprehensive planning standpoint, this will be a blueprint not only to guide public investment, but also private sector's kind of reaction to and capitalizing on these public investments through their investments. And then lastly, a plan that does not sit on a shelf but has an implementation action plan, ties in with your strategic plan and gives you a course for kind of day-to-day implementing these policies. We have a schedule of basically 5 phases, looking at a process that will take about 2 years. We are now in the laying the foundation phase. We just started with a kickoff, 2 days of very good meetings with county staff and department heads, and really laid a cornerstone, we think, for this collaborative process that we will be engaging on with county staff over the next series of months. Where we go from there in the fall and winter is start to build these integrated models. And at the same time, go to the community through the website, through a public forum, and develop, affirm, and elaborate the vision and goals for the future. From that public input over the spring and summer, we'll be building alternative scenarios, alternative visions of the future, bring them back to you and to the community and say which of these kind of performs the best based on our testing and is closest to your vision of the future. And that will give us kind of a winter of next year a clear direction of a future land use vision and policy framework that we'll use to build the comprehensive plan and an implementation matrix. And the roles in this, as Tammy suggested, are a continuation of your legacy of very active public engagement through the community participation team, serving as ambassadors to the community and also channels for a lot of the interest and the stakeholder kind of opinions in the process. The Planning Commission Working Group will do the more day-to-day leading of the plan development process, monitoring and guiding us in scenario planning and modeling. And of course, the Board of Supervisors having the authority to affirm and adopt the comprehensive plan as well as direct the implementation plan. And all of these groups will have regular updates. We anticipate updating you all at least once every phase in this, so at least 5 updates to monitor the progress. And the work will be done by the planning team, which, as I said, is really a collaboration of the county staff and the consultant team, supported by this technical advisory group of department folks, especially the ones who are going to be using these models that are available to the county after the consultants are done with their work to assist you in kind of fiscal planning and modeling for the future. So I want to take just a moment to talk about this new lens, as I said, for looking at the comprehensive plan scenario planning. It's essentially a more scientific and objective crystal ball to look at what, answer the kind of key question about what might be in store for the county in the future. And the world of scenario planning really comes from military and business planning, but it's a way of looking at this cloud of uncertainty, if you will, and not only seeing how we might respond to these potential consequences of the future, but how we might benefit and capitalize from them. So scenario planning is different from your traditional kind of long-range planning, which looks at trends and projections and kind of straight lines, the forecasts for the future. As you know, history is not destiny necessarily, so scenario planning looks at alternative futures and trying to capitalize on what is the best course based on future uncertainty and future potentials. And there's two types of kind of scenario planning based on either what should happen or what could happen. What should happen is the normative approach, we call it, and this is kind of starting with a clean slate, saying we're going to look at potential alternative futures, see which one performs the best, and really use that to build our kind of preferred future. Versus exploratory says we're pretty comfortable with our vision, and what we want to do is test it against future trends and consequences and identify the risks and the opportunities. Quite frankly, we see this as a combination of the two approaches for James City County. We certainly want to model what your existing policy framework is, but we also want to hear what the community says, what you all say as policymakers about what the future vision should be. So it should give us a rich sampling of options and data and information about these to explore the future policies. And the way we'll do that, we organize kind of all the potential trends into a series of discrete scenarios, discrete land use scenarios, and then we test each one of these against these 3 kind of models: land use, cumulative impacts, and fiscal. And they give us kind of an understanding of which of these performs the best. As you can see there, the arrow on the bottom, they also give you models available to the county for future planning and budgeting purposes. But based on this testing of these models, we will affirm a future kind of vision and direction based on public input. All of this will be done in the public eye and in public forums and the website, so the public will have an opportunity to see the results of the testing and weigh in on what they think is the future. And we'll use that to build the comprehensive plan element by element. So what we might look for in terms of scenarios as we build these scenarios, we certainly want to model your baseline, what we call the business as usual scenario. Kind of look at your current policies and trends and see what the impacts might be from a fiscal, environmental, community, land use standpoint. And then we want to look at a couple at least of different alternatives that are informed by the public forums and the input we get on the website. And they could include things like testing changes inside the PSA. Well, I think one of the survey results that you'll see later said folks were interested in more housing options and more variety of housing options within the PSA. So that could be one of the things we test. We could also test things inside the rural lands, different utility policies or housing strategies or ways for rural economic development in the rural lands. We have a lot of options with these, but we want to build the scenarios based on your input, based on public input, and not presuppose kind of what the scenarios should be. And throughout all this, we wanted to make sure that we kind of did a caveat that we always do. This is a very data-rich process, but we don't recommend that this become a scorecard type process where you rate the scenarios and whichever one gets the highest score has to be the winner. We know that you all as policymakers, elected appointed officials, have a lot of considerations. This will give you a lot better data, we think, for your decisions, but we know that it should be a data-guided process using this data in the context of all the other considerations you might have. So with that, that's a kind of whirlwind overview, and I'm happy to go back and answer any questions, but we wanted to pose a couple of kind of framing questions for you. Before I do that, just the next steps is we will look to engage the CPT and Planning Commission Working Group in the next month or two. We'll be developing the project branding and the message. We'll certainly welcome any input on what the slogan and logo for this effort will be. We'll be launching the project website and starting to build this database of existing conditions for the modeling. But turning it back to you, the two key questions that would help us. There's going to be a lot of information and useful information, but what we want to know is what questions should this process and this new kind of data capabilities answer for you? What are burning questions that could help through the modeling and analysis? And secondly, how would you define success for this project, both from a process standpoint, making sure that it's a good process and that people are engaged and involved, and from an outcome, the kind of plan you would like to guide your future growth and development in the next few years. So I will welcome any questions from you all.
Okay. Questions from the board?
I've got a few. I like how you're putting this together. It's the same thing that we're doing at the PDC and all it, and it's data driven, but it doesn't have to go just as you said, just as this popped up to the top, doesn't necessarily make it number one. Could be number two because number two is something that the board may be looking at. And I think it gives us a better comfort level because it's not this is where I think everybody thinks that we need to go. You know, it's more of a data-driven thing that we've put all these in, and this is what we're coming out. This is the end product that's coming out. This is where we're seeing that the majority of the people are looking to go and how they're looking to utilize land and how they're dividing land up or what they're looking for in the future in James City County. So I think this is going to be a lot better process in the future for us to be able to use and utilize, not only right off the bat, but years to come. So I'm excited about how some of the stuff. What should the process help you answer? I would guess basically where the citizens expect James City County to be. What are they looking for in James City County? I know we all know what we want and what we're looking for, but we're just a small group of the whole. And I would like to, see if we can dig down deep and find out, as a whole, what are the citizens looking at? What do they feel like is their number one pick? And, how do we get to that pick? And how do we measure it when we get there or in the process of getting there? What would the metrics be that we would put into place in order to say, we've reached this goal? And now what's our next goal in place? And so those are some of the things. And I think that would define the success as those metrics telling us you've gotten there. You took this from this point and basically you've hatched that egg. So, we've gotten to that. So those would be a few of mine.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And let me just add a couple of things that I'd like to get some answers to as a part of this process. First would be, how is the development process changing from past development? I mean, it does seem to me when I look at the county's policies over the several decades that I've lived in this area, there's been a big change in terms of the nature of the residential development and the business development that's occurred. And so getting an understanding of how much of that is being driven by the way in which we've viewed our land in the past, and is this consistent with what's happening in other places? Just a kind of natural trend that we have to be aware of, or not. Another aspect of that, though, I think, and a question that I'd really like to answer is, especially after looking at the results of the survey, there's an overwhelming sense of concern about the rate of growth. What are the possibilities for bending the curve on population growth? Are there ways to do it? What would the impact of that be? Can we see benefit to reducing the rate of growth, but being able to more adequately sustain that growth and accommodate it within the existing community? And that would lead me to the question of in defining success in the process, where what I'd like to see is how have the lives of our residents changed? How has the economic environment been affected? What has happened to the environment, the physical environment in which we live? Those are things that I think are critically important. And so, for instance, thinking about housing, we always see a demand for more housing, but less growth. And that's obviously a kind of basic contradiction there. And so the question I'd ask is, can we focus perhaps on ways in which we can more adequately provide good housing where we have housing that may not be most efficiently provided and most safely and securely built? So are there opportunities to revitalize areas that could sustain more population than they are currently in better circumstances? So those are the kinds of things that I think would be useful. I guess my bias in this whole process, as I'm sure nobody would be surprised, is that I worry about the growth machine, that everything is conditioned on more growth. And I'd like to see if there are ways in which we can recognize that improvement can be accomplished while moderating the rate of growth. So that's my 2 cents. Thank you.
One of the things I would like to, and I guess this is more on process, is making sure that there's enough communication throughout the community. Most people I talk to don't even know what a comp plan is. And I think a measure of success would be that people are well educated in the process. And we have a very diverse community in that there's very, very urban areas. And where I live, it's the most rural part of the county. I want to make sure that everyone is able to play a part in the process. And so the communication is going to be critical, I think, in order for everybody to be able to have input and to understand what it is we're doing, why we're doing it, and how it shapes where they live. So I think if that portion of it is successful, then the process is successful. Those are key things for me to look for.
So I would follow along that same vein. There's some parts of the survey that are concerning to me as far as like the racial, the respondents. That there are some places where we didn't get a very good mix, I don't feel. And so how can we increase that? What can we charge the community participation team with to make sure that we are grabbing? Because I do think that the defining success will be, is this something that we can really live and plan and build our future on of the county? That is when we will know that it is successful. It's something that we've got buy-in from. And we're not going to certainly get 100% buy-in, but if we can get, 50, 60%, and we think that we can use it as we make important decisions moving forward about growth, business, economic development, that kind of thing. So, and I think if we make sure that we have a very broad base from which we hear, then that will help make that success and get more questions answered as well. So,
I would start with one of the underlying assumptions I think that's always been made in the past, and that is that growth pays for itself. And I think we find it doesn't. But how you quantify that and how you build your models to take that into consideration, I think will be a very important part of the task you've got before you. We've got a whole bunch of houses on the block that haven't been built yet, and we got a huge capital budget trying to provide schools and stuff that it's going to be really tight. And what we want to make sure is that when we're looking forward, that we make I would call more realistic decisions about how we pay for what's going to be required for that growth, because that's one of the big concerns where you get out too far in front of it and you're gonna suffer in services. I go back to the comp plan survey. I think it's very, very important that we get that good information in and then supplement it with public outreach, because I've sort of had the idea that historically we've had really award-winning comp plans, and I will give the credit to the staff because they really do a great job. But over the years that I've been watching it, sometimes it fails to be translated into policy, which becomes a political issue. And sometimes we have wonderful plans and wonderful ideas, but when we make land use decisions, sometimes that just doesn't connect. We now have a little bit better connection in that we go from the vision with the comp plan through the strategic plan to the budget. So it's a better process in my mind. That I think what I'm looking for out of this is to make sure we hone that to be a much more accurate indicator of what we could and should do.
and I would just follow up too that I don't know that a lot of residents understand that there is growth out. I mean, we talk about it all the time, but I don't know how much of a realization there is that if we said nothing, if we stop today, there's still a lot more growth that is available out there. It's already out on the books. So somehow we have to also, it's coming. How do we deal with that? Plus the future, the future possibilities for even more on top of that. So it's communication piece is tough, and not only that, but navigating the two different pieces. What's possible and what is going to be here. So
I would like to offer Mr. Holman a conversation from the Planning Commission members on this as well.
Anybody have any? Mr. Polster?
One of the things that struck me in looking at the survey, when you looked at responses to services and satisfaction, was a question that I'm hoping that you're going to be able to ask us or answer. And that is, how do we, and this is the flip side of the growth is, how do you preserve the rural character of the county as we go down through the next 20 years? And so when you take a look at the services and satisfaction, I think one of the nice things that they did is they showed you a gap analysis. So people want the rural character, but they're not satisfied with what the county is actually doing. So what are the tools and strategies to preserve the rural character? And I think between the land use, your scenario planning, I think you're going to be able to give us a better idea of those alternatives as they're presented to the community. And I say that because when you take a look at the Appendix E of the survey, you have a lot of sentiment about how to preserve that rural character, but it's not articulated yet to match up with what the surveys are. And so I'm hoping that there are tools and strategies inside of those comments that citizens are looking for us to do. So that's a question. And then the success rate is that gap analysis, it's got to close. And if it doesn't close, we still have things to do.
Thank you. Mr. Crop.
One of the questions I guess I'd like to see if we could address, especially with the 20 or 25 year look ahead, is whether we have the ability to develop a new revenue stream in the county. Right now, we're primarily focused on the tourism industry and on the hospitality industries, and of course the 2008 recession brought home the fact that those are the first industries to be affected by a downturning economy and the last to rebound. And the last comp plan, I guess it was, that we came up with the idea of an economic opportunity land use designation that was specifically focused on having a minimum of residential development, but more campus-like or other types of development that could go in there, whether it be technology or whatever. And so I guess what I would like to see is just sort of a discussion of, is there the ability to develop a new revenue stream, and how long does that take? And what are the trade-offs anytime you develop a new revenue stream like that? So,
Ms. Leverage?
We have a lot of shoreline. And as part of the scenario planning, it would be very helpful, I assume, for the county to know what might be the worst case if all the doomsayers about climate change come true and all of a sudden our property owners and parks are inundated. So to have some tools in hand that would help us to plan ahead rather than react to those kinds of events.
Yeah, and to follow up on that, this is where I was going to go doom and gloom as well. Fingers crossed, in the 25 years we won't see this happen, but it could happen. And coming from I've lived on tidal water most of my life. I've worked on Jamestown Island most of my life. It's coming up, and we're seeing it in our lifetime. It's not supposed to be that quick. So I guess to follow up, my concern would be we're a little more fortuitous than our neighbors to the east. And what I think is going to happen is populations are going to move. Again, hopefully this is a little further off than 25 years, but who knows? So any sort of modeling we could do or is there somebody out there who's already modeling this as the populations move inevitably westward? So, sorry.
No, that's perfect. My question is, has already been touched on by everybody, I think, but we already have population forecasts from the last comprehensive plan. I assume they'll be updated in this. Take those forecasts in your scenario and do scenario planning with those forecasts, and what will the impact be on the county? What will the fiscal impact, the environmental impact, traffic impact, and so forth? Can you put it into dollars and cents? Can you put it into some subjective impacts. But I'd like to see what this county would look like in 2040 or 2045 if the population hits this milestone or this milestone or this milestone. And that's something I'd like to see.
One other aspect of question to think about is that a lot of those pre-approved lots are in master plan communities, I think. And so one question to ask is whether the original master plans are still relevant today, whether there is some way in which they either will be by the owners or potential developers, or ought to be reconsidered to reflect changing tastes and different kinds of utilization than might have been true in the past.
I like to.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
I was just going to add to Rich's point that about the tourism is that the one thing that we have realized, even with the downturn of the economy, parents will. So we do very well in sports tourism here in James City County, and even though through a downturn of an economy, parents will continue to travel and spend that money. Yet a field house.
You know what you're talking about.
I walk the walk. $509 at Lynchburg this past weekend.
That's why you took this job.
Exactly. Yes, exactly. But yet a field house, in your doesn't rate very high. However, something like a field house does end up paying off as a piece of revenue. So it's just, I don't know how you get all this like how do you get those statistics out and that information out as you're walking through it. But anyway, so.
I've got a few others I want to, and listen to everybody. Take a community our size, and it would have to be a larger community than what we are now, and go back to that community 30 years from now and put it to where we are right now, and then look at that community, how far it grew. And that might give us a picture of where we may be if we could compare it to a community like our size now, but 20 or 30 years ago, and what happened in that community, and what did we see that community become? Could that be a potential of what we may end up being? And we used to know, talking with John, following John's, we used to be known for our neighborhoods. And our neighborhoods were 20-year neighborhoods. It took 15, 20 years to get them built out. And now, of course, we're building them quicker and faster, and I won't go in depth on that, but we're building them quicker and faster. And then the lots that we have out there that are not even plotted yet, but in A1 is by right, 1 to 3. We need to look at those because, that's something that's, it's not in our scenario of houses, but it's out there that they don't come to any of us. As long as you fill out this, and this. And I've had people say, how did that neighborhood get in? I said, well, they did everything they needed to do. They didn't have to come to us. They followed rules. They were bigger lots and that sort of thing. So, that may be something. And the other thing we want to look at, which, I spent a lot of time in, is transportation. What's that going to do? How are we going to get around the community when we build to this point or we get to this point? Because there's no money in the state. We're limited with our funds. We're begging, borrowing, and pleading. As Paul can tell you, we're constantly going down there and trying to get any dollar we can find anywhere. And Paul and staff are great about finding those nickels and dimes and putting them together. And, shaking the pockets. And so, transportation. And then how do we get along? I know with, the PDC and TPO and all, we're looking at, intermodal transportation as well. So, how do we move about our community to other communities and all that? It may not be, 64, like you always said, there's more ways to get to Richmond other than 64. So, we might want to look at that in our communities. And we were just all talking not long ago about the troubles we're having right now with congestion inside our community. And there's no money to fix it. And it's only going to get worse. So how do we balance those in the comp plan? And how do we look at future roads and highways and paths through the community?
And how much involvement, I haven't gone through a comp plan before, but with our neighbors, York County and the city of Williamsburg, what's bothered me in recent years is I live on the 199 corridor right here, Kings Point, and there's a whole bunch of homes that have been approved over by the Marquee Shopping Center where I've got my very own Dick's Sporting Goods store. So there's hardly anybody there. But anyway, there are hundreds of homes coming there. And then we've got hundreds just, I guess the city of Williamsburg, just east of Harris Teeter's, right across the street from here. And I'm seeing it. I think I'm seeing it. It's getting more and more congested, and we don't really, as far as I've seen, talk with the neighbors. And
York County. Zach, over in Lightfoot.
Yep, big one coming in there.
They've already got the equipment in there, it's getting ready to start.
Yep, right.
And that congestion right in Lightfoot is going to be huge. Because if you travel out there Saturday, Dan's got a good point. It's not just one place. It's scattered around us.
Right.
So, we need to probably start doing like we do with transportation and do a regional look.
Yeah.
York County, what are you doing? Williamsburg, what are you doing? James City County, how does this affect each one of us as we go through this process? Because, as York County builds up at the upper end, which is our next door neighbor, that traffic's coming right into James City County.
We're interwoven with these communities.
So
I might do a quick response. On the transportation side, one of the advantages we have is Michael Baker is working with the regional model, part of the TPO's RCS process. And even though York County is outside the region, they're looking at kind of background traffic and adjacent traffic and the impact it'll have on James City County. And they're going to carve out kind of a county model within that regional context and understand traffic flows.
And it's amazing. A lot of people don't understand. It's amazing how many people leave James City County and go down towards Virginia Beach, Chesapeake, and all that. How many leave there and come up here?
Yeah.
It's when you start looking at those maps and seeing where everybody's traveling to commute. It's like, man, we could keep that group in here and that group over there, and we wouldn't have half the transportation problems that we have. But, everybody wants to go in a different direction, and I want to work down there instead of over here. And so it's trying to figure that out as well. And, there's a lot of TPO and all that's a lot of knowledge down there as far as stuff we've already done, and it's in form. So, utilize and get with Bob Crum and utilize anything you need down there.
Yeah, and we're pretty far along with that process. The board and commission may remember one of the benefits we had last time was the historic triangle traffic study piece. And so we're working with Mr. Crum and the TPO staff. We did have that tool before and answer some of those questions. We're going to refresh that, and that'll be an integral element of input into this process. So more to come on that for sure.
Great.
Okay. Are we ready to go to the next section?
Certainly, I think as we discussed, there were some technical difficulties earlier that we're going to overcome through getting our consultant on the line through speakerphone. I understand we'll need to set that up.
Okay.
We have a little time.
Short recess if you
Okay, we take a couple of minutes for them to set up. If you want to make a quick run. And now Ms. Rosario will proceed to the next.
Yes, thank you so much. We have with us on the phone Dr. Tom Guterbach from the University of Virginia Center for Survey Research. He has compiled our citizen survey results and is prepared to discuss them with us today. Answer any questions you might have.
Okay.
Tom?
Is that my cue? I guess it is.
Yes.
I wanted to say hello to members of the board and everyone there, and regret that I'm not there. It was not for want of trying. There was an SUV and 4 tractor trailers involved in an accident which completely shut down I-64 in Goochland County, and I innocently drove into this mess and came to a standstill. And when I finally was able to turn around, it said on my GPS that I would get to James City County at 7 p.m., having left Charlottesville at 1:15. So I'm in the luxurious conference facilities of the Zion Crossroads Dunkin' Donuts. I'm all set up here to walk you through this, and Tammy will be my clicker. So I'm here to present the results of the James City County Comprehensive Plan Survey, and I do think this was a very successful project, and I do want to thank Tammy and Alex especially for holding our hands through the whole thing and helping guide this project. They did a wonderful job, and it was great working with them. This is not a satisfaction survey as such. This is a survey aimed at giving input to the strategic planning, to the comprehensive planning process. And so it focused on people's opinions about county services, and it does include satisfaction questions. We also asked some more specific items about land use and development. We asked them how they feel about the rate at which the county is growing and what can be done to manage that growth. And we also had questions about communication and information from the county. We can go to the next slide. Every time I present about a survey, people think that I spend too much time on the survey methods, but I've learned that if I try to cut this too short, then someone raises their hands and says, how do you know the survey is valid? So if you'll bear with me for a minute, I do want to take a minute to talk about how we did this survey. This was done by mail. The previous surveys that were done for you in similar surveys done by the Virginia Tech were done by phone. But it has become, as you all know, very difficult to do phone surveys, very expensive. The response rate is low. There are problems with coverage and including everyone. And so we now think that mail is a better method, and it really worked very well in this instance. So we sent out paper questionnaires with a postage-paid return envelope and a questionnaire booklet on April 12th. That was followed about a week later with a thank you reminder postcard. And then after another pause of several weeks, a second mailing of the questionnaire was mailed only to the non-respondents. And on that occasion, we offered people the option to do it on the World Wide Web using Qualtrics, which is a survey platform. We can go to the next slide. And I just went the wrong way just a minute. So it didn't turn out that very many people chose to do it on the web, which is not a surprise. People generally prefer to do it on paper if they have the option. Once we got the paper surveys, of course, we data entered those and put them together with the online responses. We did weight the data. We didn't change the number of responses, but we adjusted things to better represent the county population. The percent homeowners, whites and non-whites, males and females, and the geography as represented by 4 groups of census tracts grouping north to south across the county. The weighted data, we had 1,060 completions. The official response rate is 35.3%, but we actually got another 55 responses after we cut off the deadline, and there were 207 that had bad addresses, and if you take those out of the denominator and add the others in, we actually were almost 40% of those for whom we had a valid address who actually sent back a questionnaire, and we think that's a remarkable response rate. We were pleased with it. It gives us more data to work with, and it does speak to the concern and involvement that your citizens have in this process. When you adjust for weighting, you get a margin of error of 3.6%. The demographics look pretty good for the county, as they match well, partly due to our weighting. We have 88% who live inside the primary service area, which is the built-up parts of the county. We got good representation on race, not so much on the Hispanic percentage. The sample is, however, older than the population and also better educated. But this is no different than your previous surveys, and these differences are probably due to the subject matter. Basically, homeowners and longtime residents have a higher stake in the zoning and planning issues that we're discussing here than do some of the other residents, and I think that's why we hear more from them. So let's look at the results, although maybe I should pause there for a moment, Tammy, just see if there are any questions before we go into the results.
Questions? No questions?
Oh, hearing none, I'll go on. So let's look first of all at the importance. We asked a series of services and asked people whether they thought they were very important, somewhat important, not so important, or not important at all. And leading the list were the roads and highways in James City County, efforts to protect the natural environment. Parks and Rec is considered very important and came up in a couple places. And the public schools, of course, educating the kids was considered very important by nearly everybody. Now, there were some things that were not as important. Limiting irrigation, now, I say less important, but still 80% said it was either very important or somewhat important to limit irrigation with public water. Housing opportunities generally were considered important by 78%. Bike lanes and sidewalks, 73% of people responded to that as important. Access to waterways. The least important thing was the field house or multi-use indoor sports facility, but note that that was thought to be important by over half, by a majority of all respondents. So none of the services was seen as really unimportant. We also asked the exact same list and said, how satisfied are you with these services? And that was a 4-point scale, very satisfied, somewhat dissatisfied, very dissatisfied. James City County's parks get the highest rate of satisfaction, and that comes out in 2 items that are closely related. The library services are very much satisfactory, and the rec centers again. So parks, recs, and the library are at the top of the list. I don't have room here to show the whole list. It's shown in our report. But we can switch down to the ones that people are least satisfied with. And the lowest satisfaction of all, again, just over 50%, is housing opportunities that are affordable for our workforce. So affordable housing is the thing that where people are seeing, would like to see change for the better. Efforts to attract jobs and new businesses doesn't rank very high on satisfaction. 68% are somewhat or very satisfied. Preserving rural character is another one that ranks fairly low, and bike lanes and sidewalks, and generally housing opportunities crop up again. Now, we found it very useful to put these 2 sets of numbers together. So, the next slide. We did ask, after asking these overall, how satisfied are you with the services provided by the county? And you have very good numbers. 93% are at least somewhat satisfied with the services provided by the county, considering all services overall. And by the way, I think this is unchanged from the previous year's survey from 2014. We also asked about the value of county services in relation to taxes paid, and you get pretty good numbers here. 70% rated as good or excellent. Not many are saying it's really excellent, but there aren't many who are very displeased with this service in relation to taxes. And the next slide. So in the next slide, we are thinking now about satisfaction and importance taken together. And what can we learn from the contrast between them? So here on the left-hand side of the slide, I've given you an example of the roads. You remember that was the most important thing. 97.5% thought roads were very important. Only 73.2% were satisfied. If you take one number from the other, you get a difference of 24 percentage points. libraries, the ones we just looked at, jobs and businesses, attracting those, preserving the rural character, and protecting the environment. So here are the areas where your citizens are saying, hey, this is really important, and you could be doing better. We're not fully satisfied with what you're doing. Now, there are other items that they're not very satisfied with, but they're less important, so they have less of a gap. And so this is sort of predicated on the idea that since you can't be perfect at everything, you should focus your efforts on the things that people find most important. Let's look at the next slide. Now, there's another way that we can put these two things together, importance and satisfaction. And here I really wish I was there and could point at the screen and help you look through it. So let's just take a minute and look at the top and the side of the screen. Across the top, we're arranging items according to how important they are. And so in the first column are all the items where more than 90% were satisfied. And in the right-hand column, it's the lower items. Again, numbers under 50% importance, but these are from 50 to 80% importance. And then in the middle column, the ones that are middle importance. If you look on the left-hand side, you'll see that in the rows, we're differentiating items by how satisfied people were. So the top row are the things people were most satisfied with. And in the bottom row, things that were between 50 to 80%. And we saw that for at least one item was really very close to 50% satisfied. I think that was the affordable housing item. And so if we look at these cells, we call it a priority matrix. You see that in the upper left are the things that are very important and you're doing very well. Parks and the library are the ones that occupy those cells. That cell. In the lower left, you have that item that had a really big F. Really important, your roads and highways, but the level of satisfaction is down below 79%. In the middle column on the bottom are other items that had big gaps between satisfaction and importance. Affordable housing, attracting jobs and businesses, preserving rural character, and limiting irrigation with public water also ends up in this box. So the lower left-hand portions of this grid are what we would suggest as things where you might want to focus your attention as you plan for change. And the things that are at the top left, keep up the good work, don't stop doing a good job, but these are not, you don't have that gap going there. So that's a good look, I think, at importance and satisfaction. And we can go on to some other topics that we covered in the survey. Next slide. We ask people how safe they feel in the daylight and the evening hours. Most people feel very safe during the day, but in the evening, not so many. And this is an item that where the percent who felt very safe in the evening went down significantly from the 2014 survey. Public schools, the rating of public school buildings and facilities gets a very nice rating of 85%, who rate this as good and excellent or excellent. And I believe this item has gone up from what it was in 2014. We asked the same item, or Virginia Tech asked the same item by phone back then, and you have more people saying that it's excellent and fewer rating it, down-rating the quality of the facilities and buildings. Let's turn to land use and development, which is, of course, the heart of the comprehensive plan enterprise. We asked people their opinion about different types of development in James City County: residential, office, retail, and industrial. The blue bars are the people who thought these were a bit too low a rate, and the green bar are those who thought it was too high. And you'll see that the biggest concern, 50%, just about 49%, thought that retail development was too high in the county, empty stores and so on. Residential development generates a fairly high level of concern, with over a third saying that the rate of that is too high. Let's look at the next slide. We asked about a series of development issues and about where people's priorities are and what should be done about development. There's very strong agreement that developers should pay a fee to offset any public costs, and that has stayed constant since 2014. 79% say that farmland is more important than development, more important to preserve that. These were worded a little more elaborately in the survey. We've shortened them to show on the slide, and if you want to see exact wording of these items, just go to our report. 75% think that residential development is too fast, and they agree with that. Only 59% think it's better to have small-scale retail offices in neighborhoods. It's not as popular an idea, that mixed-use idea. And then the next slide, we'll see that only 60% think it's better to have homes on smaller lots to preserve land. They don't necessarily want to pay higher taxes to stop development. It's an interesting finding. And mixed income neighborhoods aren't very popular. People are divided here. And I'll leave it to you, wise members of the board, how to figure out how you're going to address affordable housing and not have mixed income in neighborhoods. There seems to be a contradiction there, but that's what the people are saying. Let's go to the next one. How important is it for there to be proximity of residence, work, and play, which again implies a mixture of land uses. 86% think that this is important. Not many downgrade the importance, but I believe this item has also gone down in importance since 2014. And a number of those earlier items have changed significantly from where they were in 2014. Not all of them in the same direction, but several of them in a direction suggesting that people aren't quite as eager for some of these in support of these opinions as they were 5 years ago. Continuing on a similar vein, let's look at growth. I'm looking at the next slide, and then the next one. So what do you think about the growth rate in James City County? 62% think the county is growing too fast. 25% say much too fast. 36% a little too fast. We did not ask this in 2014, so we don't have a comparison to the previous year. And then we asked about a series of measures that are used to control growth. I don't know if these are all called smart growth policies, but that's what they remind me of. There's universal support, 98%, saying that if developers are going to put into development, they should provide public amenities in return for that privilege. People do want to see stores and post offices in the rural communities. There, 85% think that an interconnected street system is a good idea. Although, of course, when you try to do it, you get a lot of people who object to that particular road in their neighborhood. But in principle, people are in favor of this planning tool. They certainly support land use planning, lower taxes on agricultural and forestal lands. Reducing the number of lots for rural property is supported by 81%. The mix of housing types and prices, a little less support, 79%. 77% want a purchasing of property development rights. And again, the mix of stores, restaurants, and residential areas, 70% are favorable to it, but 30% expressed opposition. So you're starting to get some division there on that last item. And we can go to the next slide. Is everybody hearing me okay? It's getting a little noisy here. I hope that's okay.
All right, you're good.
Great. So we finished the survey with some questions about communication and information. And if we go to the next slide, 27, people are generally satisfied with the communication that the county does with them. Over half are somewhat satisfied, and 20% are very satisfied with it. So there's room for improvement, but not too much dissatisfaction. Where do they go? They go to the local newspaper mostly, but a third of our respondents said that they do use the county website. Some people use your community TV, and 26% are getting their local news online. So that's an increasingly important channel for communication with your citizens. The county website itself gets good but not great ratings. This is definitely a B rather than an A. It's generally favorable, 68% view it favorably, but only 12% say that it's an excellent website. So let's sum up. I don't want to take too much of your time. Many citizens are satisfied with your services, and they do feel good about the value that they get for their tax dollar. That seems to be a solid achievement that you have in the county government. Many do feel that the county's rate of growth is too fast, and they generally support the efforts that you are doing or proposing to control growth and development, although some of those ideas do generate division, especially those which take away from the homogeneity of residential areas. The greatest priorities for improvement are pretty clear through the gap analysis, looking at importance, looking at satisfaction, looking at our priority grid. Roads and highways, number one. Do more to protect and improve the natural environment. Work on affordable and workforce housing opportunities, and please keep working to attract new jobs and businesses to the county. And that's all I have for you, and I welcome any questions you may have about what the survey finds and what you think, any way we can help you understand what it means.
I got a question on the safety of the citizens. Changed. They're not feeling as safe at night as they were before. Would that be something that may be attributed to the age of the community as we grow older?
That's quite possible. I have to say that we have to be a little cautious in making the comparisons to 2014. We have a difference in how the survey was conducted. We had a much higher response rate than they did. The demographics are similar, but it's hard to tell if they're perfectly the same. And we did weighting to adjust our sample, but the previous vendor did not weight their data. They just took what came. So there are differences then in non-response patterns that could govern this. However, I did some comparisons, which I haven't shared with you directly, where I looked at our unweighted data compared to their data, and you still saw a lot of these same differences. What I'm going to do now, if you'll bear with me for a second, I do want to pull up the spreadsheet where I have those comparisons. Let me see if I can get to the safety item. Here we go.
Okay.
So for the evening, in 2014, 67% felt very safe in the evening, and that's down to 46% now. So that is a really big change.
It is.
Somewhat safe went from 29% up to 44%. Very unsafe from 1% to, no, that didn't change, I'm sorry. Somewhat unsafe went up. So anyway, it's a shift to less emphasis safety. So it could be age, it could be some difference in the patterns of response. I don't know what other factors there might be that affect that.
Okay, that'd be something to look into.
Well, while you have the spreadsheet up, what are some of the other kind of dramatic changes you see between the two surveys?
How you rate the public school facilities went from 27% to 33% excellence. You had 58% good, that went down to 40%, so there's a change from good to excellent there. I don't know if you built some new schools, but if you did, people are noticing. Here's a fairly dramatic one. Would you say it's better to have neighborhoods in which there's a mix of housing options and consumer services? In 2014, 32% strongly agreed. In this survey, only 13% strongly agreed. That's a pretty big change. Would you say it's better to have neighborhoods in which there's a mix of low, middle, and high-income housing options? By the way, this is in the appendix to the report. We've given you all these numbers. I'm just reading from those same numbers.
Right.
So again, should there be a mix of low, middle, and high-income housing options? 29% strongly agreed in 2014. Only 19% agreed now. That disagreement went up substantially. So I'm not sure what has changed there, but perhaps the pace of residential development has slacked a little. I don't know if that's the case. I'm sorry, I've not worked with you long enough to know the long-term trends firsthand. So those are some, I don't want to spend too much time on it, but you can browse through those and you'll see what the changes look like. on the statistical test, nearly all of the things that changed are statistically significant because these are substantial ends. You have 600 people compared to nearly 1,000 this year. So even small changes are not due to chance, but reflect a change in the population opinion.
Okay. Dr. Gooderbach, congratulations, first of all, on that response rate. It really does seem to be very strong. I wasn't quite sure about whether we will see the analysis we're seeing includes those additional surveys that came in late, or whether we're going to just see the ones that I think you'd already weighted with the ones.
No, we had a very tight deadline to get this in time for the planning process. And there was a little bit of delay getting started because of the usual paperwork stuff. So we had to set a firm deadline, and we pushed everyone to complete on time. And there's always people who come in late.
Sure.
I can assure you also that if we add those 50 cases to the 1,000 that we have, it's really not going to move the needle on anything. There's no reason to think that there's particularly, different from others in how they did it. So we have not, we don't have the funds to keep on and redo everything. To satisfy our curiosity on that.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Two other quick questions. Can you remind me again? I'm sure it's in the report, but the time frame for the collection?
It was about 6 or 7 weeks total, I think. I guess it's in the report.
Right. May?
April 12th.
April 12th. Mm-hmm. I just wonder whether you, based on your experience, we had a fairly extended and somewhat controversial case relating to affordable housing during that time period. Is that something that might have affected the outcome on issues of mixed income development in particular?
Yeah, I think the last time I came to talk to you, I think I sat outside the room for like 2 hours while it was discussed. I was aware of that. If that's the case to me. Let me see if I can find the data collection. The data collection went from April 10th to May 20th. So just as I thought, it was about a month and a half.
Right around the time.
That's plenty of time. Sometimes if we had more time, we would have given them more time, but we didn't have that time. But that's enough as you can see.
You're never going to find a perfect time, are you? I want to thank you for the tremendous detail in the appendices that you provided. It's fascinating and well organized. I can see it's even alphabetized, isn't it?
Thank you.
Great job. And one other question: I didn't know whether the range of surveys that you've done for localities across the Commonwealth or across the country would allow you to say anything about the relative performance of James City County in terms of rating of services and issues.
I would say overall very good. I have seen higher ratings. It's also a thing that's almost universally true that people love parks and love libraries. So in almost every municipal survey, those are the services that come highest. You didn't ask about police and fire, but if you had, they would have been right at the top of the list, just below those. That's pretty predictable. In terms of the growth rate, I have seen counties in other times and places that have a even greater concern about the growth rate than you see here. But this is very, very substantial concern that you are growing too fast and that they should take reasonable steps to manage it.
Great, thank you.
Any other questions? Yep. Pardon me. I came with 9 questions after reading the survey, and you answered 7 of them already. So, good presentation. The 2 that I have really have to do with definitions. One is when you say too fast. So the rate of growth of something is too fast. You're referring specifically to the rate of growth and not to the absolute amount?
Yes. That's how I would understand it. Of course, people, what the respondents understand, what those 1,060 people each thought is not only for us to guess, unless we did extensive cognitive testing on the question.
Okay.
I think it's not about the size. It's about, are you growing too fast? I think that's brief.
They're not,
It's pretty simple and clear.
so they're not concerned about where we are now, they're concerned about the slope. My second question has to do with page 18 of your presentation. It was page 21 of your survey. It's the amount of development, which amount I take to mean an absolute number and not rate of growth. But it says opinion on the amount of types of development in James City County. Can you hear me okay?
I'm sorry, I was having trouble hearing you for a moment. And
Okay.
are you talking about where they are on the slides or in the actual report, sir? I
Both.
didn't have your
It's in both, but whichever one you're on, it's on page 18 of your presentation or page 21 of your survey. Either one.
Of the survey report.
It says opinion on the amount of types of development in James City County.
Right.
And residential development is first. 6.4% think that is too low, and so forth and so on. That refers.
So let me look at the original expression wording. I think that's what you're asking about.
It is.
Okay, I'm almost there. It's after safety. So is the amount of residential development too low, about right, or too high? So that's
the one.
That is how it was wording. I'm going to look at the questionnaire again. Almost there. I'm having trouble finding it in the questionnaire. I'm sorry.
Okay, well, maybe I can phrase the question in a way that there are four sections to this: residential development, office development, retail development, and industrial development. In residential development, 6.4% think that the amount is too low. 58.7% think it's about right, and 34.9% think it's too high.
Yes, and it's about the amount. So I did find the wording of the question.
Okay, so it is.
For each, the list below includes some different kinds of development. For each one, please tell us whether you think the amount of development in James City County is too low, about right, or too high.
Today.
Yeah, that's what it says.
Okay.
Yeah, it doesn't say today, but it's implied.
Right.
And then, I'm sorry. Then it says residential development either built or approved. Office development either built or approved. So it means now or in the near future already okayed or planned.
Okay.
Approved, in other words. So that's what they're referring to.
Gotcha. Thank you. That answers my question. I'm going to take a leap here. 6.4%, or the reverse of that, 94% think that we have enough or too much residential development today. And 94% roughly think that we have enough or too much office development today. And that 94% think we have enough or too much retail development today. And 80% think we have enough or too much industrial development today. Is it fair to say that a vast majority of James City County residents think we should never build another building of any kind? I mean, is that
I'm sorry, I didn't quite hear. Is it correct to say that a vast majority
of James City County residents believe we should never build another building of any kind? Did I interpret that data correctly?
It's enough right now. Yes, that's what they're saying.
Okay.
Well, they included what's already slated to be built out.
Yeah.
But no more.
Which is like 18,000 homes.
Okay. Thank you. That's an arresting slide.
Okay, any other questions from anybody?
Well, the other question to kind of piggyback on that is with the resident having to, can you hear me? I feel like.
Can you hear?
Can you hear me down there?
I'm hearing you faintly, but I am hearing you.
Okay. The other question to piggyback on the previous question was, does that include retail space that's vacant, that's empty? As far as, is there too much? Is that why they're saying that there's too much? Because you have retailers that are opening and closing and businesses that are kind of, is that taken into consideration?
I think one suggestion I have there, I don't think I want to try to interpret it. I don't know, I'm not sure I can answer your question, but I think the answer is probably lurking in Appendix E, where I did see mention of empty retail stores. I don't remember not many more empty storefronts. There's so many new developments, many empty storefronts. That's one comment I see. There's a click with open. So I think if you look at the open ends, that will give you an indication of whether that's what they want. Less development of shopping centers until population increases. Right. Less development. Less residential and commercial development. That's under L for less. I mean, there's so I would suggest browsing there to get a better qualitative feel of what this means.
Okay, thank you.
Okay.
I want to ask, in that question that Mr. Haldeman was just asking about, when it was asked about now or approved, do you think most people truly understand what is already approved, or they're just sort of guessing?
Oh, I think the vast majority are not aware of particular developments. They, when they see the bulldozers, they know that something's happening, or they might see a coming soon, homes with basements in the 400s or whatever it says. I think that tells them what's going on. And there are, of course, a minority who follow everything very closely and are at all your meetings. But I think you're right to point out that they can only be approximating what they think is approved.
Thank you.
If they knew it, it'd be 100%.
Okay. If that's all the questions, anything else on? Are we ready to move on to the next one? Thank you very much, sir.
Thank you, and I just want to say once again that it's really terrific that your board and your county is asking people to give their direct opinion to you. It takes some courage, it takes some open ears, and it's really a credit to the government and to the people who are doing the comprehensive plan that you've reached out in this way. It's going to be a better plan because of it, and I'm really glad that we could be of help to you in learning what the people think. Thanks so much.
And I hope you get home in a timely manner.
All right.
We got one. I'm sorry, we have one more.
I couldn't be there in person. So on.
Hang on, one more.
You mentioned the qualitative nature of Appendix E, and in your report, you indicate that you haven't figured out yet how to display that quantitative information. Are you going to be able to give us some indication of the form of that qualitative data?
I'd be happy to discuss that with you. We've reached the end of our contract on the scope of services that we agreed to under the existing contract, but we're certainly able to code or to try some machine technique to look for word frequencies or something. There are ways that we can code it. It's a lot of data to digest, but it can be made. It can be summarized effectively. It's something that we just didn't write into the original scope because of cost concerns and time concerns.
Well, just as a follow-on, I did a word frequency for the rural piece on that first question. And when I went back and then highlighted the word rural to get a context of that frequency, it was interesting to see things like preserve farming, things of that sort that reinforce the gap analysis. And so I'm very interested to see if you've done something like that for the growth piece, because those qualitative pieces tell you a little bit more about the context of what you're saying.
I really agree. You learn a lot by reading those, and it is more than most people have time to read. So if you want us to summarize, we can talk about doing that.
All right. Well, keep that under consideration at this point. I do thank you again, and I hope that you get home before it's too late and dark up there, and make sure you have a donut on us.
You made me hungry.
Appreciate it. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Thank you.
Okay, I think we are.
Buy his own donut.
Tell to get three bits of the
3 bits, 3 bits on the donuts, right? I guess we are next to Mr. Holt. We're going to talk about residential impacts and goals for workforce housing.
I am. I'm up next, Mr. Chairman. Thank you very much, members of the board and Planning Commission. Before we leave the topic of comprehensive planning and some of the work here at the onset of the comp plan update and development of some of these strategic plan initiatives, the board may wish to identify the current impacts of residential dwellings on public facilities and resources and to affirm its goals for workforce housing. In your agenda packets are 2 draft resolutions for consideration. The first resolution directs staff to produce a fact sheet that outlines general or average financial impacts of residential dwellings based on a 5-year rolling average using the adopted budget, the CIP, the comprehensive plan, the strategic plan, and other relevant data. The resolution further notes that the fact sheet should use immediate and long-range fiscal impacts related to the increased use and demand on several categories of public facilities and resources, including transportation, safety, public schools, parks and recreation, libraries, groundwater and drinking water resources, and finally, watersheds, streams, and reservoirs rounds out those categories. The second resolution follows on and furthers the work of the Workforce Housing Task Force and states the board's goals for workforce housing to include workforce housing options and aspiring economically integrated neighborhoods for those making less than 100% of area median income. This resolution likewise directs staff to produce a fact sheet to be available to identify strategies for the provision of workforce housing in the county. If adopted, the information and data from both resolutions and these work efforts can be used, and as mentioned, as both baseline material and in support of the comp plan update and the ensuing financial models. I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Any questions? I believe we went ahead and did some editorials or something on one of them.
I did suggest a couple of additions to take into account things like the cost of land associated with various infrastructure, to incorporate public transit along with automobile, pedestrian, and bicycle traffic, in case there are ways in which, especially I understand that Historic Triangle Collaborative has recently asked for some investigation into the question of increasing the amount of transit funding available.
Correct.
And a couple of other, I don't have my list in front of me.
No, that's okay. We had a couple of typos in there, and certainly the cost of capital cost of acquisition for all of those are elements that are easy enough to be incorporated into the resolution.
And I would say that I think this is a really great idea to take this into account. One additional piece of suggestion that I'd make about it is that as we're starting to look at these matters in terms of the impact, that we maybe take a somewhat finer grained look than we might have in the past. For instance, where we've looked at townhouses, condominiums, apartment buildings, single-family residence. And I think that it's clear that when we talk about townhouses, we may have different kind of price points that may produce very different results. So, for instance, I think our initial calculation of the number of school children that might come out of a townhouse might have been driven more heavily by an earlier generation of townhouses that were primarily in more affluent communities where the families probably didn't have school-aged children. And we're maybe seeing more townhouse developments now where the number of school children is likely to be significantly higher. So I guess trying to capture that would be helpful, I think.
I think that's a real good idea. And anecdotally, through all my experience, I've heard from the development community over the years, the number of bedrooms is a pretty good indicator as well.
That could well be. But I think this is a tremendous idea to develop a new tool in the comprehensive plan to better understand the impact of land use designations. Great.
Okay, any, for the board, any other comments, questions? Because we have these two draft resolutions, and I believe we did want to get them moved, so.
On your resolution on number 7, water sheds, streams, reservoirs, explain a little deeper into that item.
That is to implement the recommendations of our watershed studies that the board has seen and adopted.
Okay.
That's sort of an all-encompassing study that includes those.
Okay. Has nothing to do with our next item.
No.
Okay.
No, sir.
Just want to make sure.
But so did you also, Mr. Chairman, want to talk about the workforce housing one?
Yes, we have the workforce housing one, and if you want, we'll just go to that one. And
I had a couple of things that I really think we need to think about, and I don't know that it's necessary to do it in the resolution here, but I certainly would hope that as we start to work through workforce housing. First of all, I'm uncomfortable with using our AMI because I think we are an unusually wealthy community, and the use of the James City County AMI is going to drive up the cost of what would be defined as affordable housing if you're trying to provide it to people who are in our workforce and can't live in the community. And in relation to that, I also wonder about defining affordable housing up to folks who are at 100% of AMI for this region, because, again, I think that number is a pretty high one and probably is, if not above, it's certainly close to the average house cost in James City County today. And so if we're talking about that being affordable housing, kind of doesn't mesh with what I think is being reflected in public comments about wanting to have more housing available to people who can't currently afford housing in the county. So,
if I could follow on to that, because I had exactly the same concern. And page 10 of the Workforce Housing Task Force says that in 2018, the average home price in the county was $316,500. And by the way, the average for the United States as a whole, according to the Federal Reserve Bank of St. Louis, was $317,400, which is essentially the same. Mm-hmm. So we know that James City County does not have overly expensive housing at the average. The report also states that $79,000 annual income is required to purchase a median-priced home. Happily, our AMI is $80,000, mm-hmm. So there's a perfect match. Mm-hmm. The median rent in 2016 was $1,236 a month. So you inflate that a little bit for a couple of years, and I don't know what it is now, but let's say it's $1,400. The income required to comfortably carry that rent is $49,400. Call it $55,000 for inflation. That's only, 65% of AMI. So that you only need to earn 65% of AMI to afford the average rent in James City County. Mm-hmm. I think our problem lies not with the averages, but with a mismatched dispersion around the average. And the workforce, if you read the report, I'm sure you've all seen the ghastly examples of the number of people who, I don't know how they do it. I don't know how they get through a day. The income tail is much longer than the housing cost tail. And I thought it was great when I read this that you would, the old housing opportunities policy went up to 120% of AMI, and you've cut it down to 100%. I think the focus should be much lower than 100%. And that's a backdoor way of coming to your problem, Dr. McLaren, I think. Mm-hmm. I think maybe as low as 50%, because these are the people who really have a hard time living here, mm-hmm. and putting food on the table at the same time. So,
right. I mean, that's the dilemma that I think we face here, is that we could, on the surface, look as if we're really addressing the problem just by letting the market play itself out. And we're not really going to be able to solve the issue of people who we know are stressed in terms of meeting housing costs.
Two pieces of quick follow-up to get to some of the points you raised. One, I'll go back and re-verify the methodology. This is an area-wide median income, so I don't think it's an AMI specific to our jurisdiction, our jurisdictional boundaries. I think it takes into account our larger MSA, and I'll follow up with you on those details about what localities that encompasses. So to the degree that that's averaged out or somehow reflected over the area that's outside of our municipal boundaries, I think our methodology currently addresses that. I do think, too, that per some of the previous documents, it referenced affordable and workforce housing focused at folks making between 30 and 120% of AMI. I know the Workforce Housing Task Force really wrestled with in getting their mission and value statements correct and what it is they were trying to achieve. They spent a lot of time really wrestling with those sort of questions and defining that a little bit better. I think when all was said and done, the task force had recommended looking at a range of the 30 to 100% of AMI. But, as we mentioned earlier, a lot of this work that the task force did will continue on through the comprehensive plan. And it could be one of the earlier questions that Mr. Gorilovich raised was, what are sort of the outcomes? What are the questions that we want to be asked? That question could continue to be a part of the comp plan update conversation about, is that 30 to 100% really where we want to be, or can we, or should that be relooked at, or a different segment of the population looked at, trying to be assisted through some of these measures. So really the 100% was in there as a reflection of the task force work. I didn't want you to think that I was otherwise an arbitrary number.
All right, I understand. Yeah. And I appreciate the fact that they recognize that 120% was absolutely unrealistic as a way to deal with housing affordability.
It'd be nice to know how it compares to the region, and and where we're at on that. That would help out a lot as far as giving us some concrete information.
Okay, there's just two others. There's a reference to affordable, but there's no definition of affordable. And I know everybody understands it's 30% of gross income, but should we have it in there somewhere?
So we're gonna have that as part of that fact sheet.
Great. Okay.
Yes, sir.
And my only other one is the board aspires for at least 20% of residential dwelling units in the county to be offered for sale or made available for rent as follows, and it's broken out there. I think you mean new residential dwelling units. It's not all the dwelling units in the county, including the ones that are already here, are going to be repriced somehow to.
It's not even the ones that have already been approved that are not yet constructed.
Right. I just put the word new in there as a modifier.
So it's an aspirational statement. I might be a little bit worried about adding that in. I would maybe want to spend some more time. That may be something we would want to revisit. But since it's just a general aspirational statement, at this point, staff would recommend not adding that in.
Good deal.
Okay. Any other discussion? Either resolution? Okay, we'll look for that. And
so we can hold off on this till we get the other information back, so we know if that 100% is where it needs to be.
no, I think the plan was that this is the aspirational statement that they will come back with in the process when they're going through this, is if they when you feel it just needs to be refined down further, that's what.
And that would come out as a result of that continued public input over the next 2 years as we look to update the comprehensive plan as a whole.
So what we put out is, I would imagine this will be a worksheet basically to move forward on. But if we don't have the right numbers, we may be putting something out that is not.
Oh, absolutely.
Where we
again,
want
this
to
is
go.
sort of our baseline. This is sort of where we are today. And again, as we conclude this comprehensive plan update, again, as was mentioned earlier, we're going to come back to you with recommendations for improved financial models and improved calculations. And based on all of that new methodology, this is our baseline. This will get us from here to there.
But I think the point that Michael is raising is an important one, which is basically that are people going to then point to this and say, but you said you would do this? And
even though we may change it.
Right.
Yeah, that's.
They may look at this and say, well, this is what you said you're going to do.
Right.
Where if we get everything together before we pass it, then we know where we're at then at that point.
Sure, but we need something to, staff's recommendation, we need something to get us through these next couple of years till we get to that point.
Right, but I think what we're asking for simply that we sort of verify the numbers and consider whether we want to set that 100% as the right place to do.
Right.
Which we could do at our next meeting.
Oh, I see what you're saying.
And just go to the next
just
meeting.
clarify it and have a more of a sense that we're not putting something out there that we're going to worry about whether, if we already have worries about whether this is going to be the right place to land, we don't want to say this is our policy to guide the discussion.
Sure.
Yep. So you're basically talking about the goals for workforce housing resolution to have them work on and bring it back to us at our next meeting.
Correct.
Okay. Is there consensus of the board to do that? Okay. The other one on residential dwelling units impacts public facilities and resources. Dr. McGlennon had the edited version, which he talked to us about. And if you would like to move that one, we can vote on that one.
Sure. Has the board seen it?
I don't think I have.
You want to go ahead and just hold this one off until the next time too?
Unless there's a compelling reason to.
We can bring both back at your next meeting.
Yeah. All right.
I think it's fine.
Then what you'll do is you'll bring the edited version back so that everybody has a chance to see the one on the first one, and the second one, we'll look at the numbers and have those for us at the next meeting. So, okay. Fine. All right. That answers that question. Okay. I believe we are now to Mr. Holt. You're going to talk about potential ordinance amendments.
Yes. So changing topics. So yes, coming way off of the countywide comprehensive plan level all the way down into the weeds. So we're going from one end of the spectrum to the other. So members of the board and commission, consistent with our previous work sessions where ordinance amendments have been discussed, for our next discussion and decision point item, staff will be following that same format and will provide a brief synopsis of the item, the options available, and then, of course, followed by recommendations of the policy committee or commission as applicable. So with that, first up are potential ordinance amendments to address master plan consistency determinations. As you may recall, section 24-23 of the zoning ordinance states that all final development plans shall be consistent with board adopted master plans, but may deviate from the master plan if the planning director concludes that development plans do not contain significant changes. At its May 22nd, 2018 work session, the board asked the commission to consider limiting the number of residential dwelling units that could be transferred by a master plan consistency determination under section 24-23 of the code. And since that time, the policy committee has discussed this section and possible revisions. The proposed text of the ordinance amendment is included in your agenda packets as attachment number 1. And in short, it states that any development plan that proposes dwelling unit counts or dwelling unit types or dwelling unit locations that are significantly different from that shown on the adopted master plan shall be submitted and approved via a public hearing and formal master plan amendment, and that such decisions are not subject to appeal to the Development Review Committee. And that was based on direction that everyone received from the board previously. Prior to advertising this item for a public hearing with the Board of Supervisors, the Commission will report out its findings and recommendations to the board. Mr. Howard.
Thank you. The ordinance revisions that Mr. Holt just mentioned were written by the policy committee with help from the planning staff, of course, and then referred to the planning commission without a recommendation. The planning commission voted unanimously 6-0 to recommend that this ordinance not be adopted by the Board of Supervisors. We did it without making any changes to the policy committee recommendation, or the policy committee's work. And so if you have any questions, I'd be happy to address them.
Anybody? If you have a puzzled look on your face. Okay. This comes back to the issues that I had raised earlier, one about Stonehouse, but also about master plan issues in Newtown and in Fort County. And after having been through the grist mill, our planning commission has unanimously recommended we just leave it alone. And I'm perfectly happy to let them do that.
So for staff's next steps, then our takeaway is that there's consensus not to advertise this and bring it forward to the board. Okay.
Yeah. I think we're. I don't want to waste your time on anything. Okay.
You're either way.
All right.
All right. With that, we'll change to the second item. So next up are proposed amendments to address protections for the public water supply. At its May 22nd, 2018 work session, the board expressed interest in examining and discussing regulations to protect the drinking water supply in areas of public health and water quality sensitivity. And on November 13th, the board adopted the corresponding initiating resolution. At its November 27th work session, the board further directed the Planning Commission and staff to develop these regulations within the special regulations section of the zoning ordinance. Policy committee subsequently met, and 2 items have come up where additional board direction and feedback would be appreciated. First, the draft ordinance included in your agenda packets as currently written would have a 100-foot buffer applying to all types of tributary streams within the watershed, with the reservoir watershed. Those would be both perennial and intermittent, as well as a 200-foot buffer around the water impoundment themselves. For this item, additional board input as to whether the additional special regulations should apply to just the water impoundment, just the water body and the reservoir itself, and or whether or not it should wrap in the corresponding streams. So options moving forward include option 1, don't include any additional requirements for streams within the reservoir's watershed. Again, this would mean that the reservoir protection buffer would be around the impoundment or water body only. If you want to include the streams, then the options really become, do you include the additional buffers around just the intermittent streams or just the perennial streams? Ms. Leverance has the policy committee recommendation.
We're at stage 2 in this process, so we're considering actual wording of a proposed ordinance. And at our last meeting, the policy committee discussed with a great deal of information from staff. The Chesapeake Bay ordinance already covers perennial streams and a 100-foot buffer around the reservoirs. So this now would duplicate the Chesapeake Bay ordinance on perennial streams, add intermittent streams, and add a 100-foot buffer. So to prevent overlap and try to make this as least confusing, policy committee thought that it would make most sense to just add intermittent streams and add the 100-foot buffer around the reservoir, and just let perennial streams, which are covered adequately, very well, by the existing ordinance.
So then that would be 200 feet
For the reservoir,
for the reservoir.
and then 100 feet for the intermittent streams, which are not covered at all by the Chesapeake Bay.
And I know when we originally started bouncing this around, it was more of a worry for like underground storage tanks, gasoline, oils, that sort of thing, and somehow leaching into our waterways.
Correct.
I'm worried about up in our area, Susan, my area, as far as if we're getting that far out, then homes, even drops down in homes and chicken yards, and, you know, where I think we ought to look at it more of the commercial or certain commercial activities.
Or industrial. And that actually factors into the second question that we'll be talking about here. So right now, we're just talking about what does this apply to from the natural resource standpoint. Does it apply to streams, both perennial and intermittent? But we'll also be discussing about what kinds of development it applies to.
Right. And I think with my opinion, you know, what we have in place now, and I think when John was talking, we were talking more of, we're worried about like a gas and oils and that sort of thing that could leach out that maybe we don't know for years that are causing problems. What does since we don't own any of the impoundments, reservoirs, or whatever, what does Newport News do, and how do they? I know I'm building not right on the reservoir basically, and there's a line there. You will not cross this for anything. You can walk down the water and look at it, but that's all you can do. And so they've got a pretty good protection around their reservoirs. And, you know, is that cover us? Or do we need to have, is there another layer? And I don't want to, and I know we're going to get into the next one, but I'm worried about restricting any type of development that people own lots and that sort of thing, being able to use their lot. All of a sudden now, I was going to put a house here, but I can't afford it for another 10 years. Now all of a sudden this comes in place. I can't put a house at all. My lot is useless. And I've got to protect those citizens as well. You know, and I want to make sure that we protect our water source. That's important, but maybe not on the residential side, more on the industrial type side.
As part of the stage 1 process, the policy committee also looked at the comparable regulations in place in York County and Newport News. And my recollection is that their buffer around the reservoir was 100 feet. Was it the same?
Newport News has 100 feet around intermittent streams and 200 feet around perennial streams and impoundments themselves. But one point of comparison is that their Ches Bay regulations only cover about 10% of the county lands versus James City County. The whole thing is Chesapeake Bay, so we're either RMA or RPA.
Right. So
that they do have buffers around their streams because they don't have other ordinances.
But we have it in the Chesapeake Bay, so we're protected more really than Newport News is with their ordinances.
Generally, yeah, I think that's how we see it.
So we're in better shape than really what Newport News has right now.
Well, except that Newport News has the 200 foot on the impoundment itself.
Right. And Chesapeake Bay is only 100.
Okay.
Right. And I don't want to jump ahead because I know you have the second issue, but I think that's where the real question is about whether that 200 feet around the impoundment should apply to just commercial activity, residential activity, or agricultural activity, which I think is the thing I'm interested in trying to understand a little bit better.
But if I'm more worried about the oil side, the gas side, that sort of thing, not the...
Well, right, but I wonder whether, a feedlot or a hog pond might be an issue.
Right, but
in that 200 foot.
I think then at that point, we ought to make the option for Newport News if they want to buy that 200 foot right away, have Newport News buy that 200 foot right away to protect their reservoir.
Well, except a substantial number of my constituents drink the water from those reservoirs.
Oh yeah, ours too. But but I can't kill one. Throw the baby out with the bathwater. I'm trying to figure that. Trying to go with that thought. Right, trying to find that balance between.
And I understand the residential part of it. I'm worried about contamination. And I understand that, putting your deck up in that second 100 feet is not going to contaminate things, right? And all like that. But if there's an intensive agricultural use within that second 100 feet that has the potential to contaminate, I worry about that.
I'm trying to think if there's any around any of the reservoirs.
Well, I don't know, and it may be that there's not.
And I don't think there's any. The last one was over by Dozier's, and they haven't done that in 20 years.
And that's...
Are there any comments, questions, concerns about including intermittent streams?
Yeah, I think we're getting... Once again, I'm worried that as we're adding that, and that could be a stream that is only active 6 months of the year in the wintertime, now all of a sudden, we're limiting what somebody can do with their land all the way up to that point.
Are there any advantages to limiting anything with regard to intermittent streams?
Well, it doesn't
if we don't cover intermittent streams at all, then we can't regulate anything. So the first question is whether we should even consider including intermittent streams in this ordinance.
Well, I think
without the question of who it applies to. Do we want to cover them at all?
If when they check that, even intermittent streams that are dry in the summertime, depending on the plant and the water and air, that's included in, because I know it is on my property. I've got some that I can't go into that area. It's all protected, even though you go down there in the summertime, there's not a stream down there. And then all of a sudden in the wintertime, we get that extra water. All of a sudden now it's considered a stream. So I'm 100 foot out off that stream on each side. So I think that's covered under that as we are right now. Are we not, Paul?
I don't think intermittent streams are not covered by a Ches Bay.
Well, mine is on my property.
I mean, there might be some other component downstream. Maybe it's a tidal wetland or something. I don't know.
There's something in there because mine at the very end is dry as a bone unless it's raining. And I'm all the way to the end where I can't put anything 100 foot on each side of it. Yeah. And so there's another piece to this that I may not have enough knowledge to understand it yet, but there's another piece to this puzzle that is in the Chesapeake Bay.
I mean, I can check back on that one specifically and see if there's.
Just refresh, your recommendation was 100 feet?
100 feet around the intermittent stream.
Okay.
So that it would not be duplicative of the Ches Bay and the RPA.
Because the Ches Bay already covers the perennials with 100 feet.
Right.
Okay.
And the only thing that's going to do, if somebody has a tight lot, they're not going to put anything on it. If it's a tight lot.
Well, it depends on what you get to and what you're restricting in the second part of it here, because I think that's, I think it's pretty clear that what first paragraph I'm reading, they're not talking about.
Mr. Hipple, for example, this diagram that was in the handouts talks about that pink line up in the upper right-hand corner.
Right.
That's the only intermittent stream on that map.
Uh-huh.
So that's the only part that would be added.
The only one that we know about.
Right. At this point.
Yep.
Yep. So
the impact.
By adding this in this area,
the extra 100 feet, right?
This extra 100 feet is going to impede this development that is set for developing in James City County. So we're going to take off a certain amount of commercial development in Greenmount that we already have a couple possibilities down there. This may come into place. Now all of a sudden they may get wiped off. And, I can understand put things in place, bulkheads and that sort of thing to contain water and ponds to contain water and that sort of thing. But I'm worried about putting another layer on top of this, because when originally we talked about it was what we have in place, protecting it from more of oil and gas and that sort of thing. And now we're into adding another more 100 foot onto what we have. And that, I guarantee you, is going to knock some of these properties right off. By the time you put everything else in, parking lot, building, BMPs and all that, and plantings and everything else, there's nothing going to be left. It's not going to be. And that's what I don't want to hurt are the people that, those as well. So it's kind of a balance. How do we figure, do we stay within what we have now and say anything that abuts to this has to, may not be allowed to be, you may not in Greenmount put a gas station now on that piece of property because it's proximity to the reservoir. That may cover what we're looking to do. Anywhere around the reservoir, this and this are not permitted because of the possibility of a leach of some sort. They're all supposed to be protected, but we all know everything can leach, everything can leak. So maybe we look at that scenario rather than adding 100 foot all the way around it. We look at, okay, what can go up next to it and what are the potentials of contamination? Because that's what we're trying to get is what is our potential of contamination for this? And I'd like to almost have some conversation with Newport News, and comparing to what they're doing and what we're doing. And I know some of the places, were already put in place and
You know, there are buildings next to these streams and all that, and that's heading right into the reservoir. But some of that was in place before they got to this point. And I think we're trying to prevent that, you know, which is a good thing. We're trying to prevent this from.
So are you saying restricts specific uses as opposed to putting an entire buffer around that whole thing?
And then that I think would accomplish what we're trying to.
Restrict specific uses. Where?
Within a certain area around a reservoir. You know, we'd have to pick up, you know, within a reservoir.
It would be that 200 foot, for example, but instead of, it would be
not
just listing out uses.
Would you want to extend that to the entire watershed? I mean, the whole watershed drains into the reservoir.
Well, then we wouldn't have anything left. You know, that's a terrible thing, but we wouldn't even have houses.
Aren't the buffers just only for certain uses?
Yes, there are specific exclusions within that 200
Right,
foot.
so a lot of things could still happen.
Specifically.
It's just what don't you want to
couldn't do
drink?
storage tanks, you couldn't do.
Anything that would, discharge or anything with hazardous materials, slurry coal facilities, land application of industrial waste, sanitary landfills, or manufacture, storage, or storage of hazardous materials, unless those enhanced performance criteria kicked in, is the way the
But it does not restrict all development within that 200 feet.
No, those separately, that was the earlier reference to the limitations within the buffer about if that area could be disturbed or not.
But all those would have to come before us anyhow.
Oh, yes.
They would come in front of both
Not
boards.
necessarily. I mean, if it was a by right use and it met those criteria, it would be a by right. They wouldn't have to. And under any request for exceptions to the Chapter 23 of the Code, Chesapeake Bay, that goes to the Chesapeake Bay body.
Maybe
and then as proposed here, the exceptions would go to the Development Review Committee.
Maybe that's something we'll look at, is what's by right around the reservoirs. And is there something by right we may want to change as far as what can be put in?
Well, there's really the two, it's up to the board's discussion and feedback. That's the reason why we're here. There's really the two concepts that are in this. There's the setting of the buffers and what you can do within the buffers, and then there's separately what you can and can't do within the watershed, which is where that prohibition on the discharge of hazardous materials, the slurry coal facilities. So it's just,
See, that's regardless of buffers. That's just the whole watershed.
Correct.
Because if you're going to do that kind of stuff, it's going to wind up in your reservoir anyway, whether it's within 200 feet or not. It's anywhere in the watershed. So, I think what we were really more concerned about was not to get hung up on the buffer or whatever, but on what uses that we wanted to regulate and to keep from getting that stuff into the watershed, into the water.
Well, if we don't consider the buffer, we're going to knock out certain properties that are existing now that will never become anything for all the regulations. So it's where you could put a parking lot.
I don't, I think you're reading more into it than I think they're intending. At least that's my interpretation, because what they're talking about, we can say, all right, we're not going to have any buffers. We're just going to use the whole watershed.
No, I'm not thinking that.
The whole watershed. And what we're doing is we're saying that we want to prohibit or limit the discharge of things that would actively hurt our water supply anywhere within that watershed. That's really irrelevant of 200-foot buffer or 100-foot around perennial or even around intermittent streams. But what he's talking about is I don't know whether we need to get wrapped up in buffers or footage or whether we just say, all right, here are the uses and it's for the whole watershed. Now, it means that if you live in that watershed and you've got a piece of property, you can now do whatever you want inside that 100 or 200 feet as long as it isn't one of these things.
Yeah, but then we might as well take the county complex down because this drops into the watershed, and our drainage right out front here goes that way.
I don't.
So that would.
I don't think they're talking about stormwater. I think we're talking about
that stormwater is going into our watershed.
No, I understand that.
You know, I got to think all these things through.
But the question is, if you were doing an oil change station out here and dropping oil in that stormwater drain,
right?
That would be something that we would want to do. You know, we've got stormwater facilities to try to treat the stormwater that goes off, and and it gets into it's ultimately going to wind up in our drinking water.
Mm-hmm.
But what we want to do is to prevent that kind of gas, oil, chemical solvents, whatever industrial type of stuff like that from leaching into the water. Because right now, my understanding is we don't have a whole lot of ability to prevent that.
Other than the Chesapeake Bay.
Yeah, Chesapeake Bay we've got. But by adding this extra buffer, you're going to take land that somebody may be able to do something with and take it off the books. They may have, some of this land down here, and that's what I'd like to know. How much land further down, follow this map down towards the dam, what is being taken out? What potentially is the loss to the owner and to James City County?
I'd like to sort of propose another way of looking at it, and then maybe you can answer the question for me right now. If we decided that we weren't going to do any of these to 200 foot around the reservoir, or do nothing different than what Ches Bay has right now.
What could we have?
All right. But we decided we wanted to look at these pollution contaminant issues by watershed. What are we going to prevent that can be done by right now, other than those things we don't want to happen? You see what I'm saying?
No, go over one more time. Because I'm seeing that could knock out a bunch of service stations within the community right now.
Well, it could.
Yeah. But see, that's not what we're doing. I mean, that's like saying, okay, if we wipe out all the houses, we don't need a school. But that we still need the houses and we still need the school. It's how we put it all together.
I guess my question then would be for you, Michael, how would you limit this kind of discharge into our water system? What kind of regulation would you write? How would you go about doing it? You have to have some methodology to say, here's what we're going to allow. This is like zoning. You're going to have to, this is what's allowed in this zoning. This is what's not allowed in this zoning. And I don't think we're being overly restrictive. I don't think it doesn't mean you can't put a service station. I think it means that you've got to be able to meet very strict requirements when you do it. And we're really carefully watching certain things that we really don't want done in there. Like, what was it, the slurry?
Yeah, so I'll try to answer your questions. One, I think we can come back with a larger map of all of the Skips Creek Reservoir and show the concepts in this image with the 200-foot buffer and the 100-foot buffers. We can enlarge the extent of this representative map. Mr. Eisenhower, to your earlier question, again, the way the ordinance is currently written, there would be the buffer, the 200-foot buffer around the reservoir itself, and within that, the intent would be to leave those buffers generally undisturbed. But if you separate that stream question out, or that specific buffer question out, and focused on the provisions that are in the draft ordinance that are within all of that watershed for Skips Creek Reservoir, really it doesn't take any uses off of the table except for the slurry coal facilities, land application of industrial waste, and the sanitary landfills. And you can't just flat out have a discharge of hazardous materials. So in that example, if you just focused on the location of a gas station generically within the watershed itself, you could do that under certain additional performance standards. And within the ordinance, that means you couldn't have the station located within 200 feet of any stream or reservoir. You would need to have adequate spill handling and containment structures. Any underground storage tanks would need to be double walled with warning devices. And there were some additional submittal requirements about soil conditions, some other things that would be submitted as part of that review. But as the ordinance is currently set up, that's how that would play out. That helps answer that question about a gas station specifically.
And that's pretty good protection as far as...
It is. It is. And it doesn't prevent them. You know, I mean,
right.
It says that Now, I think it's pretty smart not to put one within 200 feet.
Right.
That's the kind of thing I'm looking for, is that kind of performance requirements and backup to make sure that we are dealing with what potentially could come from normal uses like a service station, as opposed to the others which we just say has no place in our watershed at all.
And then that would take care of the 200 buffer, because then we'd regulate what's going into a certain area next to a reservoir.
Correct, and that would be limited to those uses. And that's when those enhanced performance standards would come in, but it would not introduce necessarily then sort of separate buffers.
Right. So somebody could put something down there, but it has so many things put in place that you're better off to save money and go up the road where they don't have to deal with it.
Yes, sir.
All right. Yeah, I'd like to see if you could extend the map down and extend it to the other reservoirs as well. So we can see the whole scenario. I know what we're trying to do, and I think there's another way of doing it. And by regulating and, looking at putting the things in place, like Paul was saying, that if you're going to do this, it's going to be 200 foot away, and it's going to have all these things in place in order to, take care of it.
So how would this affect existing farmers?
So that's really sort of the second half of that question is, should the ordinance specifically say this applies to commercial and industrial uses? Or if it should also include agricultural and residential? Because with adding that kind of specificity in the ordinance is the best way to administer the ordinance, is to know exactly what it is the board wants.
I guess my question, you were talking in agriculture, you were talking feedlots and livestock impoundments. And I guess my question is, do we have any in these buffer zones that we would be looking at?
Well, we could have potential for it.
To look. Certainly you've got agricultural zone land.
Right.
I don't know if we have any existing. It would have to take some time to take a look at that.
And two, we got to be careful because we're promoting agritourism.
Yep.
So, on the other hand, we're chopping it off, but then we want it.
Well, there's a difference between agritourism and feedlots or animal impoundments. And, I think if you wanted to farm or do anything down in that's fine. I can remember driving through Muleshoe, Texas, in the middle of the night. You could always tell you were in Muleshoe. You didn't have to see it. You could smell it.
Yeah.
Welcome to the rural lands, my friend.
And I'll tell you what, you didn't want to be around the water supply downstream from that either.
Yeah.
Okay, so that's the issue. It's not that we wouldn't have that kind of stuff. The question is, where would it be appropriate?
Which would be the A1, which is around most of our upper end reservoirs. And it was like the cow we rescued out of Diascow. And should it have been in the reservoir? Oh, no, it shouldn't have been in the reservoir, but part of the land is incorporated that. Right. The cow walks out to the reservoir, get a drink of water and sink. I mean, it's crazy. But I've got to look at that up at my end as well. And maybe that's something we say, define a feedlot. Because I look at a feedlot, could be a place you feed in the wintertime and they graze in the summer, but it's really not a commercial feedlot. But this is where I feed the animals, during the wintertime and roll the hay out and all that. But it's going to get muddier and it's going to get this. And I think we need to dive in probably a little deeper and say, what is a feedlot? So, and what's considered? Is it 10 cows, 20 cows?
And what's an impoundment? I hate to sound.
The dam.
Yeah.
Everything upstream of the dam.
Yeah.
But you said livestock impoundment.
Oh, in that context, it's everything on the inside of the fence.
Right, inside the fence.
So probably a good idea also to have some kind of buffer. I guess there already is a buffer, but between with pesticides and herbicides, because I don't want to drink those either.
Yeah. Yeah, and most of those come out of our neighborhoods.
But the difficulty is
that's the thing.
It's not the farms, it's the lawns.
Yeah, the lawns, everybody's
clovers, man.
Yeah, throwing it out.
The only difficulty I have is sort of taking agriculture as just, it's not commercial. There is commercial agriculture. And that's what I'm worried about. It's not, it's the impact of commercial agricultural activity within that 200-foot buffer that could potentially, again, contaminate the drinking supply. We know that fecal matter is one of the major causes of pollution in waterways. So, yeah.
Just to be fair, Paul, has any of this been discussed with the EDA? Not, but because they are actively pursuing this area. So we probably should be talking to let them know that there is this going on and there is this discussion taking place, just to see what they're out there going after. Not saying that, but let's just make sure they're aware. So.
What about intermittent streams?
So if you all may be ready to reach a decision, I was sitting here thinking you wanted some additional information first before getting back on either one. So we will bring you back a larger map of the Skiffs Creek Reservoir, and then likewise on the other two, we'll bring back maps of those reservoir watersheds and lay out where those 200 and 100-foot buffers would be.
So will that include any of the farmland up our end of the county?
Yeah, that'll be around
active farming.
And so it would be helpful, again, if you all are wanting us to bring something back other than those maps and to reach out to the EDA, let me know what that is so we can have all that.
And I heard some definitions too that would be requested as far as what's a feedlot definition.
Yeah, commercial.
Right.
And while we're at it, what about residential, particularly subdivisions? I mean, there's one thing if somebody who's already in that 200 feet wants to add a deck. But what if there's a parcel in a potential subdivision that would encroach on that 200 feet? You probably should consider that as well.
So I would, in the interest of just trying to be responsive to their request, from staff's perspective, it may be helpful to know if you want to pursue ag or residential first. We could jump up and find 10, 20, 50 different definitions to cover some of the agricultural things. But if at the end of the day you don't want to consider agricultural, it's a lot of work if you're not going to get there. I may want to see if there's a consensus on use before we bring in the additional definition piece.
I don't know any
just from an efficiency
commercial farms out there right now other than planting corn.
Well, I think when it comes right down to it, there are not that many farms, period.
Yeah.
But Paul, I think that there are some definitions on number of horses, number of pigs, number of cows, et cetera, that are in the ordinance that define commercial.
Yeah.
So it's the issue of what comes into the future. So you may not have it now, but you may have it in the future. So if you have the information about what those numbers are, it'll also give you some indication then of what the manure rate is based on a feedlot or something of that sort. But there are specific limitations for livestock numbers that get it to define the commercial piece to include horses. So if you knew that.
Aren't there some state regulations on agricultural? I know there's a big issue out in Franklin County when I go out there about dairy farms and the cows and the runoff into the lake.
And the gas.
Yeah.
So what I can do is I'll bring you back the maps. We'll reach out to the EDA, and then why don't I bring you back, at least at the James City County level, our existing definitions.
Yeah,
okay.
That'd be good.
Because again, there's 1 to 10,000 definitions out there, and
Yeah.
Can either reach the bottom of that or I can't. It would be helpful to know where my stopping point would
definitely
be. Okay.
Okay.
And then from there we can revisit these choices.
And the stream.
And the stream question.
Yep.
Yep.
Okay.
Thank you.
All right.
Thank you. Thank y'all.
Let's see. Did we have?
Those were the hard ones. I do have a
you got inoperable motor vehicle and
hopefully this
temporary
one,
offices.
Yeah, this one. So just in the interest of time, temporary offices and the updates that staff is pursuing for the wireless communication facilities, which are driven by changes in state code. That information is in there just for informational reasons to keep you all up to speed. There's no decision points. I think the temporary office one will bubble up to the board. That one's been through the commission. But those are just in there for informational pieces.
Okay.
So again, in the interest of time, you've got two options for the inoperable vehicles. We need to be able to respond to change the zoning ordinance to be adaptive to the change in the charter that was granted by the General Assembly. So the question then really becomes, while we're in there doing that, do you want us to also take a look at the respective code provisions on restricting parking of heavy vehicles in residential neighborhoods? So, dump trucks, semis, and, we can add that into the zoning ordinance for up on private property, but we may have to wrap in some other code sections if you don't want those to park on the street either. And so sort of knowing that going into the process would be very helpful.
Well, we've gotten an incredible amount of feedback on that residents are not in favor of that type of equipment being on neighborhood roads. So I would say yes for myself.
What would the code look like on, say somebody brought it home, they're working late, they got to run in the morning, but they don't park it there all the time. They bring it home one time here and there. What is that?
I don't know. I think that's part of what the next exercise, we'd have to sit down with police and see what their enforcement deal is. We would certainly go out and benchmark and figure out those level of decisions at the next.
And I think one thing to look at too would be probably the fire chief.
Yep.
As far as if we've got a large truck on the road and it's limited access, the neighbors beyond that, can we get the fire equipment in to take care of their issue if they have one with a truck blocking part of the access in and out of the neighborhood?
And certainly, as you all know from experience, when those things go into the code, those objective criteria are a lot easier than sending staff to count how many nights a piece of equipment sitting out in front of somebody's house over a given year. That's almost impossible to enforce and to keep track of. So we'll go out, and if I'm hearing that there's consensus for us to look at both pieces, then we can do that, and we'll bring back more information for you.
Does this also cover monster RVs?
Depends on the definition of monster RV.
I mean, some of those guys are big.
Some of them are. Some of them are huge. And I know some neighborhoods where you got to ride around them.
We'll figure that out. Most codes will express that in terms of gross vehicle weight or the number of axles, for example. So,
on the subject of inoperable vehicles, one of the items on the use list for A1 agriculture is automobile graveyards. I don't know if you want to extend this discussion to that, but they're certainly inoperable. And
I'd be cautious to mess around with some A1 stuff. Just saying. I'll direct the phone calls to you.
Just saying.
I know.
But the question about Michael, as you say, when people might be leaving the car there for a few days, then leave it.
Right.
These are cars that don't have registration or.
No, I mean the big trucks.
Oh, commercial trucks.
Dump truck or something that they come home and they've just finished, and instead of taking it to the office, they brought it home and taking it the next morning early. Yeah. Might be one or two of them, but that may be something that.
Make sure they do it under cover.
Yeah. Put an RV cover on.
Yeah, I just want to be careful there because that's just one of the situations that a constituent reached out to us about, where that was what was told, but it's come home every night.
Yeah.
And so how do we regulate? Okay, well, you can bring it home tonight, but not tomorrow. So.
Yeah, I agree.
All right, that's all we have.
That's all you have for that?
Those. And lastly, Mr. Chairman, the last issue for tonight is a proposed amendment to our zoning ordinance, section 2416, which simply puts back into practice and into the zoning ordinance the ability for the county to accept proffers as part of new residential developments or development amendments where residential units are proposed. Again, just a really straightforward piece. This clarifies that we're able to do that again. Since this item has been reviewed by the Planning Commission, we've added in some specificity with applicable reference to the state code. So before this comes to the board for a vote, we recommend taking this back to the Planning Commission just because we added in some of the reference pieces, and then we'll bring it forward back to the board.
I think that's a great idea, given the 2019 legislation that was approved.
Yeah.
And with
All right.
that,
Everybody
that's all we
comfortable with
have.
that?
Yes.
Okay. Okay, very good.
Get that done.
I think our last one here is Mr.
Dr. Gooderbach could be here right now.
We'll be calling back. Hey, we're still going.
So
that was it.
That was it.
Yeah.
That was it.
Yeah, I just wanted to cover it quick since we
You
ran
just
long.
let Adam get out of town.
He did.
No, he's going to help me with some of this research. He'll get all
All
of
right.
it.
Okay, I think that takes us up through the end of our discussions. Any board requests or directives?
No, sir.
Well, sorry. Just one, recycling continues to be a concern. I just want I want to acknowledge that I'm hearing from people who have not gotten a cart, don't want a cart. We've run into some situations where carts are not being picked up. HOAs are really on people about getting carts out of the way. We sent out an update last week, which I really appreciate. And with all the aggravation, I have to continue to give kudos to General Services because when, we have had these ones of, we had someone reach out today that doesn't live here. They've been trying to get their cart picked up since it, they have that's a reverse snowbird situation. And it's been sitting there, very obvious that they're not home. They've tried and tried and tried to get it picked up. Grace went out and got it today. And I had that happen in the reverse last week. And so I appreciate everything that we're doing. I am just so doggone frustrated by the whole process. But I do really appreciate that everything that the county's doing. And but I just hope it continues to smooth its way out because I know people are really aggravated. And that said, though, I mean, I've had 2 recycling pickups so far in my brand new brown can, and it's all gone very smoothly. And so thanks for everything that we're doing. But continue to push out information if there is new information to push out. And then the only thing other than that is that I will not be here at the August meeting. So.
Should be out picking up some of those recycling.
Exactly, yes.
Can I just add one thing about the recycling? I wonder if VIPSA or Tidewater Fiber, whoever, is keeping account of the number of homes that they're picking up from on a weekly basis, because I noticed a significant decline this past week in the number of recycling bins that were placed at the curb. And this is before people are being billed for the service. So.
I'll ask. I would assume they're keeping some counts, but I don't know in their initial month that they have, but I'll find that out.
Just like to kind of keep monitoring that purpose. And I also just wanted to mention that last Saturday I attended a memorial service for Rob Till, the Grove Community Garden, which was well attended, and folks had a great opportunity to express their appreciation for what he had done. And I want to especially thank the staff of Parks and Rec for the great work that they did in making the facility available and for providing support for the event.
Yeah, I want to follow up on that, not the garden, but the recycling, just because I continue to be worried about the fiscal impact of. I know right now we're covering it, but they said they wouldn't charge us more with the number of opt-outs, but is there a tipping point when? So I just want to make sure that we stay abreast of what's going on with the number of people opting out. I would think that if you are opting out, though, you are increasing your trash, which then the private providers, you and I have discussed that they're probably going to raise it anyway just because of the number of items that we can't recycle. But I would think that your private provider would start to increase your usage too, because you probably need more. I fill up an entire recycle container. So anyway.
Yeah, I think for TFC, their contract language, VIPSA has the contract with the FC, the contract actually picking up the carts. There's language in there that protects us in terms of lowering the number. And I believe TFC is committed to doing what they can do in terms of servicing our community They'd like all 25,000 households to stay in. We're down to about 21,000 households today.
Okay.
My guess is we'll lose a few more thousand once we start billing, and we'll probably be 15 to 20,000 participants. And I think the change of the name, where you have TFC on the side of the carts that were delivered, that was a concession that PIPSA gave so that TFC could use those carts elsewhere. So I think they're committed to being here. It's just got to settle out, and once it moderates, I think you'll have a number and you'll add as you go forward. In terms of the garbage costs going up and people putting more, I think it'll be months before the collectors on that side see their tonnages change and know that that's a real change in what they have seen before. I think it could have an impact on what people pay for garbage service, but it may be 6 months removed, a year removed before you, and by that time you may or may not equate it to being because of the recycling change or lack of people recycling as much. So I don't know how to answer that question exactly, but in concept, I'm with you. I think it's likely that it could cost people more for garbage service for a number of factors, but recyclables that are going into the trash is certainly one of those.
Yeah. So I hope we'll continue the education piece about the importance of recycling even once we get through this sort of crisis that we're in.
Absolutely.
And I do have to say that the explanation I got from Dawn about number 1 and 2 plastics or versus the next stuff was the clearest explanation I think I've ever found. I don't know, is that on the website now?
I will make sure of that. It
was a good explanation because there was a lot of people were concerned. I didn't understand the difference, but it had to do with the types of plastics, manufacturing process, and the melting points. It was a very clear explanation of why we're doing one thing and not another. And so I think it would help the public to see that. So, okay. Anything else from the board? Would you like to see if your board would like to adjourn?
I certainly would. May I please have a motion to adjourn? All in favor? Aye.
Mr. Chair, can I just take a minute to thank the Planning Commission for not only their time today, but all the hard work you all have been putting into all these questions. I know it's very complicated, and sometimes you're trying to read our minds, and I know that can be a very challenging.
We can't even read our own minds.
I was going to say, sometimes we have trouble reading our own.
Right. But it's really very much appreciated.
Yes, thank you.
Very much so. Thank you very much.
I'll look for a motion to adjourn until 5 p.m. on August 13th for a regular meeting.
So moved.
We have a motion.
Mr. Ripley?
Aye.
Ms. Larson?
Aye.
Ms. Sadler?
Aye.
Mr. McGlinnan?
Aye.
Mr. Rice?
Aye. We are adjourned.